Hello and welcome back to Bedtime and History. Tonight, we travel far into the lands where the Maya people built their world among rivers, forests, and stone. You step quietly into their story, and at once the air feels heavy, filled with warmth that never lifts even at night. There is no breeze to cool your skin, only the steady rhythm of insects and the soft chorus of frogs calling from dark water. These sounds carry across centuries, unchanged, as if time itself drifts slower here. You probably wouldn't survive this place if you were suddenly dropped into it. The heat, the food unfamiliar to your stomach, the strange sicknesses hidden in the jungle, but for now you are only passing through as a quiet guest. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening right now, let me know your location and the local time in the comments. It's always a comfort to see how many corners of the world come together in these quiet evenings. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Maya world begins to open around you. This was not one single kingdom, but many, scattered like embers across what we now call southern Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador. Between about 2000 BCE and the centuries that followed, families here learned how to coax maize from the soil, and with it, an entire way of life began to grow. Maize was not only food, it was identity, myth, and destiny. In Maya creation stories, the gods shaped humanity from ground corn, kneading flesh from dough. To eat maize was to remember that you yourself were maize. The earliest villages were simple clusters of huts with roofs made of palm leaves and walls coated in clay. Inside, the air smelled faintly of smoke from hearth fires that never truly went out. Families tended their plots, women grinding corn on stone slabs, men cutting back forest to expand the fields. Chickens scratched near the doorways, and dogs lay in the Sunday. Children grew up learning the cycles of rain and soil, when to sow and when to harvest, when to thank the spirits of earth and sky. Life was measured not in years as we think of them, but in seasons, rains, and the waxing of moons. Time was sacred, woven into every action. Days were thought to carry personalities of their own, with some suited for planting, others for feasting, and still others for solemn rituals. A child born on one day might be destined for healing, another, born on a different day, for war. The weight of calendars and sacred reckonings guided every step of life. By around 1000 BCE, some villages had already grown into larger centers. Farmers produced more maize than their families needed, which meant surplus, trade, and gatherings of people who specialized in new tasks. Clay workers began to mold intricate pottery, smooth to the touch, decorated with red and black lines. Carvers worked jade into pendants that gleamed softly, cool against the skin. These were no longer simple farmers' settlements. They were becoming communities where crafts, trade, and ceremony lifted daily life beyond survival. With each passing century, the villages connected into networks. Rivers became highways, and forest trails wound between communities, carrying voices, ideas, and goods. Salt, vital for preserving food, traveled inland from the coasts. Obsidian from distant volcanic slopes was chipped into knives and spear points. Bright feathers of exotic birds became treasured decorations, fluttering during ceremonies in the plazas that began to take shape. This was a world rising steadily toward complexity. Between 750 BCE and 400 BCE, the outlines of what we now think of as Maya civilization had already been traced. Leaders emerged, not only as chiefs of villages but as figures who claimed a sacred role, bridging human needs with divine will. They declared certain spaces sacred, raising platforms of stone where rituals were performed under the open sky. People gathered in awe, listening to prayers that echoed in the warm night air, firelight glinting on painted faces. The heart of the Maya world was always both practical and spiritual. To plant a field was an act of devotion. To build a home was to recreate the universe in miniature, with the roof like the heavens above and the floor like the earth below. The center hearth became the sun, its smoke rising as an offering to the sky. In every action, from cooking to storytelling, the sacred and the ordinary were woven into a single fabric. By 400 BCE, certain centers like Nakbe in the Petén region of modern Guatemala had already risen, with stone platforms larger than anything before. To stand near them was to feel the ambition of a people who believed they were part of a cosmic drama. Each generation added more, carving blocks from the limestone bedrock, hauling them by hand, and raising them higher toward the sky. The jungle pressed close, but the Maya pushed back, claiming spaces for plazas, shrines, and gathering grounds. Centuries slid forward. By 200 BCE, the patterns were set. Families tended crops, leaders claimed divine descent, calendars shaped the days, and trade carried goods far and wide. Yet what lingered strongest was a sense of belonging to each other, to their maize, to their land, and to their gods. To live as Maya was to live within a story larger than yourself, a story stretching backward to creation and forward into destiny. And so, as the fireflies blink in the heavy night and the stars scatter across the canopy of sky, the first chapter of Maya life takes root. Their civilization is no longer a seed, it has sprouted, and its roots grip the earth. What begins as small villages and hearth fires will soon become a world of stone cities, towering temples, and festivals filled with color, song, and sacrifice. First villages rise. From the earliest centuries, life in the Maya lands was rooted in the soil. Around 2000 BCE, families began to move away from nomadic hunting and gathering, settling instead in small farming villages. They chose fertile ground near rivers and lakes, places where the rainy season could be trusted to renew the earth. Every detail of survival revolved around maize, the sacred corn that was planted, nurtured, and harvested with ritual care. You hear the sound of stone against stone, matates grinding kernels into flour. Women worked patiently, rhythmically, turning corn into dough for tortillas and tamales, foods that sustained their households. Children carried gourds of water from streams, while men cleared more fields with fire and stone tools. Squash vines crawled along the earth, beans twined up the maize stalks, and together these three sisters' crops offered nourishment year after year. Life was hard, yet dependable, patterned by the land's rhythms. Villages often sat on raised ground, safe from floods. Houses were simple, oval or rectangular, built with poles and thatched palm leaves, their walls sealed with mud. A family might have several huts, one for sleeping, one for cooking, and another for storage. The hearth at the center was not only practical but sacred, its three stones representing the three hearthstones of creation set by the gods in the sky. At night, embers glowed faintly as families told stories of spirits and ancestors, passing memory forward through quiet voices. Even these small villages carried the seeds of greater complexity. Community leaders arose, usually elders respected for their wisdom, who guided when to plant, when to harvest, and how to honor the gods. Shamans played a central role, reading signs in the smoke, offering prayers for rain, and guiding ceremonies to keep balance between humans and the natural world. Without written records yet, memory itself was the library, carried by those entrusted to remember chants, myths, and histories. Over centuries, from about 1500 to 1000 BCE, villages grew larger. Some became gathering hubs, where farmers exchanged crops and hunters traded meat for pottery or tools. The earliest ceremonial platforms began to rise, built from earth and stone, signaling the first steps toward urban life. These were not yet the grand pyramids, but they were beginning spaces for ritual, community, and the declaration that human hands could shape sacred ground. Time itself became a companion in daily life. The cycles of the sun and moon guided planting, harvest, and rest. Each day was thought to have a character, a fate, a divine influence. Birthdays mattered, not in the sense of celebration with cake, but in destiny. A child born on a certain day might be fated to heal, another to fight, another to serve in ritual. The calendar was not only a measure of time, but a blueprint for human purpose. Food, too, reflected both sustenance and symbolism. Maize was ground into gruel or shaped into tamales wrapped in leaves. Squash seeds were roasted, beans boiled, and chili peppers added a sharp bite. Cacao, not yet the sweet chocolate we know, was bitter and strong, used in drinks reserved for ritual and for the powerful. Honey from stingless bees sweetened offerings, and salt from the coast preserved fish and meat. To eat in the Maya world was not merely to fill the stomach, it was to participate in a sacred cycle between humans, plants, and gods. Festivals punctuated the seasons. Though small at first, gatherings grew to include music made from flutes, drums, and rattles. Dancers wore simple masks of wood or clay, moving in rhythm to honor the spirits. Offerings of food, flowers, and incense were placed at shrines, their smoke rising into the open night sky. These were moments of connection, when individual lives blended into a shared experience of gratitude, awe, and fear of the divine. By 1000 BCE, the foundations of Maya civilization were already present. Maize fields stretching across cleared land, villages tied together by trade, rituals binding communities, and calendars giving shape to existence. They had not yet carved great cities from stone, but the roots were deep. Step by step, these early farmers were laying the groundwork for a world that would endure for millennia. A world both ordinary in its daily labours and extraordinary in its vision of cosmic order. The fires of their hearths still glow faintly in the long night, reminding you that civilizations are not born in a single moment. They grow slowly, from soil and sweat, from family and faith, until one day the humble huts of farmers become the plazas and temples of kings. The villages of the early Maya were more than homes. They were seeds, seeds that would soon burst into cities of stone and ritual power. Stone cities emerge. By the centuries between 800 and 400 BCE, the Maya lands were already shifting from clusters of farming villages into something grander. You walk forward through time, and the shape of life begins to change. The hearth still glows in family homes, maize still fills the stomach, yet above the villages, new structures start to rise. Platforms of earth become platforms of stone. Plazas are cleared, ball courts are marked, and monuments appear markers of ambition, memory, and belief. These are the beginnings of Maya cities. Nakbe, deep in the Petén forests of what is now northern Guatemala, stands as one of the first great centers. Around 600 BCE, builders piled limestone blocks into pyramids rising above the canopy. They did not have metal tools or beasts of burden. Every block was cut with stone, hauled by hand, lifted on ropes, sweat dripping, muscles straining. The jungle pressed against them, but they carved open plazas where the sun could pour down, where ceremonies could be seen by hundreds. Nakbe was a statement. The Maya were no longer a people of scattered huts but of stone cities. By 400 BCE, El Mirador followed, even grander, with pyramids so massive that their outlines still dominate the forest today. One pyramid, La Danta, rose more than 70 meters high, making it one of the largest in the ancient world. To climb it was to feel closer to the gods, to stand above the endless trees and believe that human effort could mirror the mountains themselves. The Maya were shaping not only homes but landscapes of meaning, places where heaven and earth could meet. The cities were not random collections of buildings. They were planned, aligned with stars and solstices. Plazas were arranged for festivals, temples for rituals, palaces for rulers. Ball courts appeared, long stone alleys where rubber balls would echo during sacred games. The city itself was a map of the cosmos. Each pyramid stood as an axis connecting the underworld, the earth, and the heavens. Every step upward was symbolic, every stair a prayer carved in limestone. Within these growing centers, life was full of sound. The rhythm of drums echoed during ceremonies, conch shells blared like trumpets, rattles shook in time with dancers' feet. Murals covered walls, bright with red, blue, yellow, and green pigments made from plants and minerals. They showed gods descending, kings standing tall, mythic battles fought in both the heavens and on earth. The cities were not silent ruins as we see them now. They were alive with music, color, and voices. Markets became busier. Farmers brought maize, beans, and squash. Fishermen carried dried fish. Craftsmen laid out pottery painted with curling glyphs, jade pendants polished until they gleamed, obsidian blades sharp enough to slice a hair. Merchants exchanged these goods not only within the city but along trade routes stretching hundreds of kilometers. From the Gulf Coast came salt, from the highlands came obsidian, from distant lands came brilliant quetzal feathers and seashells. The cities grew not only by stone but by the weaving of trade networks across the Maya world. Daily life inside the cities remained anchored in the household. Families still cooked over hearths, still planted fields just outside the walls, still raised turkeys and dogs for food. But in the city, the scale of life felt different. Festivals brought thousands together in plazas, standing shoulder to shoulder as rulers appeared in towering headdresses of jade and feathers. Rituals took place not only in quiet shrines but before entire populations, binding the community through shared awe. Hierarchy grew clearer. At the top stood kings and queens, claiming descent from gods, their blood spilled in ritual to feed the universe. Around them clustered nobles, scribes, and priests, men and women who read the stars, recorded histories, and directed ceremonies. Warriors fought in the name of their rulers, defending the city and capturing enemies for sacrifice. Below them were the craftsmen, the traders, the farmers, the wide foundation that sustained the brilliance above. Cities created distance between people, but also dependence. Every role mattered, and each person lived within a structure that was both social and cosmic. Religion was visible in stone. Each temple told a story of gods and ancestors. Each pyramid was a reminder that the world itself had been built in layers. The underworld below, the earth in the middle, the heavens above. To climb a pyramid was to move through those layers, to enact the journey of the soul after death. Blood offerings, incense smoke, and sacred chants filled the stairways. The gods were not abstract, they were present, hungry, demanding, and watching. The classic period, beginning around 250 CE, saw this transformation reach its height. Cities like Tikal, Calakmul, Palenque, and Copan rose into brilliance. Their plazas could hold thousands, their temples soared above the treetops, their art grew intricate and breathtaking. Each city was a kingdom, often in rivalry with its neighbors, sometimes allied, sometimes at war. Yet all shared the same underlying structure. Maize, fed, God-centered, stone-built, star-guided. To stand in a Maya city during these centuries was to stand in a world that felt eternal. The temples stretched upward like man-made mountains. The plazas buzzed with life, smoke rising from food stalls, children chasing one another near the ball courts, nobles carried in litters draped with cloth. Everywhere, symbols of time, fate, and divinity marked the walls, reminding every person that they were part of a cosmic cycle. And yet, beneath the grandeur, the foundation was always the same. Families tending crops, women grinding maize, children learning the names of days, men building and repairing, markets filling with voices. Cities were grand, but they grew from the humblest acts, repeated daily. The greatness of the Maya was not only in their rulers and monuments, but in the millions of small lives that sustained them. As centuries rolled onward, the forest seemed almost to bow to these cities of stone. The Maya had created something lasting, something that spoke not only to their time, but to the future. Even now, when the jungle has reclaimed so many plazas, when temples rise as silent mounds beneath trees, the outline of their cities remains. They are reminders of ambition, of faith, of a people who believed that stone could bridge heaven and earth. From villages to cities, the Maya had entered a new age. The stones set in place during these centuries would endure for over 1,000 years, carrying memory long after voices had fallen silent. To walk here is to walk in a place that once pulsed with human life, a place where civilization itself took root in stone, daily home life. Inside the great stone cities, life still centered on the home. The vast plazas, towering temples, and murals spoke of kings and gods, but daily rhythm unfolded in smaller spaces, humble courtyards, kitchens filled with smoke, gardens edged with chili plants. This was the heart of Maya living, where families worked, rested, and passed traditions quietly forward. A typical household belonged to an extended family. Parents, children, grandparents, even aunts and uncles lived together in clusters of buildings surrounding a central yard. Each home was built from materials close at hand, wooden posts sunk into the ground, walls woven from reeds or sticks, then plastered with clay to hold out the rain. The roofs were steeply pitched and thatched with palm leaves, shedding the constant tropical downpours. Floors were hard-packed earth, cool to bare feet, swept smooth each morning. The home was more than shelter. It was a small universe. In the center, the hearth glowed with 3 stones supporting a clay pot. To the Maya, those 3 stones were cosmic. They mirrored the hearthstones set in the heavens when the gods created the world. Smoke curling upward was not only cooking fire, it was offering prayer and connection. Women tended the flames carefully, making sure it never fully died. In every spark, the cycle of creation seemed to live again. Morning began early. The first light seeped into the thatch, and families stirred. Women reached for baskets of maize stored from the last harvest. Kernels were rinsed, soaked with lime, then ground by hand on metates heavy stone slabs worn smooth by centuries of use. The grinding was slow, rhythmic, almost meditative, filling the courtyard with a steady rasping sound. This was work done daily, for hours, producing the dough called masa. From it came tortillas, tamales, and gruels that fed everyone from children to kings. Men worked in fields just beyond the city walls, tending maize, beans, and squash. They cut back brush with stone axes, built terraces on hillsides, or carried baskets of water to nourish young plants during dry spells. Hunting also remained part of life. Deer, peccary, and wild turkey roamed the forests, and skilled hunters used bows, spears, and traps to bring meat home. Fishing in rivers and lakes provided another steady source of food, especially for those living near the coasts or waterways. Children played, but always with purpose. Toys were simple clay figurines, spinning tops, or balls made from rubber. Games often echoed adult work or ritual, teaching skills they would need later. Boys followed fathers into the fields, learning to plant and harvest. Girls stayed close to mothers and grandmothers, practicing grinding maize, weaving on backstrap looms, or carrying water jars on their heads. Play was practice, and practice was preparation for adult life. Weaving was a central skill. Cotton and agave fibers were spun into thread, dyed with natural colors from plants and minerals, then woven into cloth. Women wove sitting down, looping one end of a loom around their waist, the other around a post or tree. Hours passed as fingers moved with practiced grace, producing garments, blankets, and ceremonial cloths. Patterns held meaning lines and diamonds symbolizing earth, sky, or ancestors, so even clothing was part of the language of belief. Food was simple yet varied. Alongside the staples of maize, beans, and squash, families grew chili peppers, tomatoes, avocados, and cacao, honey-sweetened drinks, and salt-preserved fish or meat. Meals were communal, eaten from clay bowls or banana leaves. Tortillas were warm, tamales steamed in husks, drinks poured from painted vessels. Food was more than nourishment. It was identity. To eat maize was to live as Maya, to renew the bond between people and gods. Religion seeped into every corner of home life. Small altars stood in courtyards, decorated with incense burners, clay figurines, or offerings of flowers and food. Families prayed for rain, health, and safe births. Special days called for rituals, naming ceremonies for infants, marriages celebrated with feasts, burials marked with gifts placed beside the dead. Ancestors were believed to remain close, guiding and protecting. So homes became sacred spaces of both the living and the departed. Festivals brought change to the routine. Families prepared days in advance, grinding extra maize, crafting masks, and sewing bright garments. When the day arrived, courtyards emptied as people walked together to plazas. There they joined the crowd, carrying food and offerings, ready to dance, chant, and watch rituals unfold. Afterward, they returned home, tired but renewed, the memory of firelight and music lingering long into the night. Through it all, humor and affection softened the edges of hardship. Parents teased children, neighbors shared gossip, friends laughed while working side by side in fields. The Maya world was not only solemn rituals and grand monuments, it was also the simple pleasure of stories told around fires, the joy of festivals, the warmth of family life. The household was the foundation of the civilization. Without the daily rhythm of grinding maize, weaving cloth, and raising children, the pyramids would never have stood. The strength of the Maya was not only in kings and cities, but in countless homes where people lived, worked, and believed together. Their greatness was built on ordinary lives, repeated day after day, anchored by the hearth, the field, and the family, maize, beans, and squash. The Maya world rested upon three humble plants: maize, beans, and squash. Together, these crops were called the Three Sisters, and for the Maya, they were more than food. They were identity, religion, and survival intertwined. Every stalk rising from the soil, every seed saved from harvest, every roasted kernel or steaming tamale held meaning. These plants fed millions, allowed kingdoms to flourish, and became the living symbols of a people's bond with the earth. Maize, or corn, stood at the center of all things. In the sacred creation story recorded in the Popol Vuh, the gods first tried to make humans from mud, but they crumbled. They tried again with wood, but those figures were brittle, heartless, unable to praise the divine. Only when the gods shaped flesh from maize did humanity succeed. Yellow and white corn became the very substance of human flesh. To eat maize was to renew that truth: you were made of corn, and corn made you. This belief infused every act of farming with sacred weight. The agricultural cycle followed the rhythm of the seasons. Fields were cleared by slash and burn, a method known as milpa. Men cut trees and brush with stone axes, letting them dry under the tropical sun before setting fire. The ash enriched the soil, and into this prepared ground families planted maize seeds. Soon after, beans and squash followed. Their partnership was ingenious. Maize stalks provided natural poles for beans to climb. Beans restored nitrogen to the earth, and squash spread wide leaves across the ground, shading soil and preventing weeds. Each depended on the others. Each strengthened the others, just as human communities relied on cooperation to survive. The work was endless. Rain had to come at the right time, pests had to be kept away, fields had to rest after 2 or 3 harvests. Families often rotated plots, moving to new land when old soil grew weak. Maize was planted in cycles timed with celestial events, the rising of Venus, the phases of the moon, or days marked as favorable on the calendar. Agriculture was not just practical labor, it was guided by cosmic patterns believed to echo the will of the gods themselves. When maize ripened, ears were harvested carefully. Some kernels were eaten immediately, roasted over open fires until they popped. Others were dried and stored in clay vessels sealed against moisture. Still, others were set aside as seed for the next planting, chosen with care. Women soaked kernels with lime water to soften their skins, a process known as nixtamalization, which released vital nutrients. The softened maize was then ground on metates, long, flat grinding stones into dough called masa. The sound of grinding was constant in Maya courtyards, a steady rasp that echoed through centuries. From this masa came the foundation of Maya meals: tortillas, thin and warm, eaten daily; tamales, dough wrapped in leaves and steamed, sometimes filled with beans, meat, or peppers; atole, a hot maize gruel, thickened with chili or sweetened with honey. Even drinks made from maize were common, providing energy and comfort. Life revolved around this grain. Its forms were as varied as the needs of those who ate it. Beans added strength to the diet, balancing what maize lacked. Black beans, red beans, white beans, all boiled, mashed, or stewed. They could be eaten alone or folded into tamales. They were humble, but they supplied protein, and they symbolized partnership. Just as they climbed the maize stalks in the field, they climbed into every meal, every household, every stomach. Squash contributed both flesh and seed. Its orange interior could be roasted or stewed, while seeds were toasted, ground into sauces, or eaten as snacks. Squash vines also gave shade and protection in the fields. Their sprawling presence reminded farmers that life required guardianship, not only strength. Where maize stood tall and beans clung upward, squash spread wide and low, shielding soil from heat and erosion. The three sisters were a lesson in balance, but the Maya diet stretched further. Chili peppers added heat and depth to dishes. Tomatoes provided richness. Avocados, with their creamy flesh, were a luxury from orchards. Honey, collected from stingless bees, sweetened drinks and medicines alike. And then there was cacao, the bitter bean that would one day conquer the world's palate. For the Maya, cacao was sacred. Its seeds were roasted, ground, and mixed with water, chili, and honey to produce a frothy, bitter drink. Cacao was not casual refreshment. It was a drink of ceremony, wealth, and elite power. It also served as currency, with beans traded for goods. To hold a pouch of cacao was to hold wealth itself. Salt was equally vital. Inland communities relied on coastal trade, where seawater was evaporated or brine boiled down into cakes of salt. Merchants carried these precious blocks by canoe and foot into the heart of Maya lands. Without salt, preservation was nearly impossible. With it, fish and meat could last for weeks. Salt was survival disguised as seasoning. Meals were communal affairs. Families gathered on mats in courtyards, sharing from clay bowls or banana leaves. Children were served first. Elders received honor, and everyone ate together. Eating was not rushed. Food was savored, stories were told, and gratitude was given. A tortilla was never just bread, it was a gift from gods, a piece of identity, a symbol of survival. Religion and food were inseparable. At every major festival, food offerings were made first to gods and ancestors. Bowls of maize, roasted squash, or cacao were placed on altars, incense smoke curling upward with their fragrance. Food marked passages of life births celebrated with feasts, marriages bound with shared meals, deaths honored with offerings for the journey into the afterlife. The gods fed humans, and humans fed gods. This exchange was the essence of balance. The harvest season was a time of joy. Fields filled with families gathering ears of maize, laughter rising as baskets filled. Songs were sung to thank the gods, and whole communities prepared for feasts. Dancers painted themselves, masks were carved, drums sounded, tamales were made by the hundreds, beans boiled in great pots, squash roasted over open flames. Food was abundance made visible, meant to be shared with neighbors and strangers alike. No one celebrated alone. The three sisters shaped not only diet but identity. To call oneself Maya was to call oneself people of maize. Beans and squash stood beside it, faithful companions, teaching lessons of cooperation, balance, and resilience. Together, they sustained life through droughts, wars, and centuries of growth. The pyramids would not have risen without them, kings would not have ruled, scribes would not have written, and astronomers would not have charted stars. Civilization rested on fields of green stalks, twining vines, and spreading leaves. Even today, in the modern villages of Mexico, Guatemala, and beyond, the three sisters remain. Tortillas are pressed fresh, beans simmer in clay pots, squash grows in fields and gardens. The continuity is unbroken, stretching back thousands of years. Every bite taken now carries the echo of ancestors, a memory of creation, a reminder that humanity itself was shaped from maize. The three sisters were not mere crops. They were the foundation of existence, the silent companions of every household, the living proof that the Maya relationship with the earth was one of reverence and reciprocity. To eat them was to be nourished, but also to remember you were made of corn, sustained by beans, sheltered by squash, and with every meal you returned that truth to the cycle of life. Markets and trade routes. The Maya world thrived not only on the crops that fed its people, but on the exchange of goods that connected communities across hundreds of miles. While each village and city had its own fields, forests, and rivers, no place could provide everything. What one lacked, another offered. And so the Maya built networks of trade on foot, by river canoe, across mountains, through forests, until their civilization became a web of movement, carrying not just objects but ideas, stories, and beliefs. Markets were the beating heart of this exchange. On designated days, plazas filled with stalls shaded by woven mats or palm leaves. Merchants arrived at dawn, spreading blankets on the ground and arranging goods in careful rows. Farmers brought maize, beans, squash, peppers, and tomatoes, filling baskets with the colors of the fields. Hunters sold dried meat or pelts. Fishermen offered fresh or salted fish, and gatherers carried wild honey in clay jars sealed with wax. Smoke from food stalls rose as tamales and roasted maize were prepared for hungry visitors, their scent drifting through the air. Shoppers arrived from every part of society. Nobles came to seek fine goods, jade pendants, quetzal feathers, or painted pottery. Craftsmen searched for new tools or materials. Farmers traded surplus for salt, cacao, or cloth. The market was not only commerce but community. Neighbors exchanged gossip. Travelers shared news of distant towns. Matchmakers arranged marriages, and performers entertained with music or stories. It was a place where daily survival and social life merged into one. Currency took many forms. Cacao beans served as the most common measure of value. A handful might buy food or tools, 100 might buy a cloak. Small bells of copper, though rare, were also used, as were beads made from shells, but barter remained central. One farmer might trade maize for obsidian blades. Another might offer honey for woven cloth. The act of trade itself carried weight agreements, sealed with handshakes, friendships, or ritual oaths before ancestors. Trade routes stretched far beyond the boundaries of any single city. Rivers were highways, and canoes glided over their waters, loaded with goods. Along coasts, traders sailed between ports, carrying salt and dried fish inland. Across mountains and forests, men travelled on foot with heavy packs strapped to their backs. There were no beasts of burden here, no horses or oxen, no wheeled carts, only human legs carrying weight over long miles. The endurance of Maya traders was legendary, their footprints connecting kingdoms. From the highlands came obsidian, the volcanic glass sharper than steel carved into knives, arrowheads, and ritual blades. From the lowlands came cacao, treasured as drink, currency, and sacred gift. From tropical forests came feathers of brilliant birds, quetzal tail plumes shimmering emerald and blue, macaw feathers burning red and yellow. From coastal saltworks came cakes of salt, white and precious, stacked in bundles. From distant regions came jade, cool green stone polished until it gleamed, carved into masks, beads, and ornaments for the noble and divine. These goods carried not only value but meaning. Jade was eternal, linked to life and maize, worn by kings in ceremonies. Feathers embodied the sky, draping rulers with the power of birds and gods. Obsidian carried the essence of fire and earth, a tool of survival and a weapon of sacrifice. Cacao linked the human to the divine, a drink of gods shared with kings. To own such items was to hold a piece of cosmic power. Merchants were more than traders. They were cultural messengers. As they moved from city to city, they brought news of battles, alliances, and festivals. They spread ideas, new ways to build temples, new styles of art, new stories of gods. They carried languages and dialects, blending words until communication crossed boundaries. Trade was not only goods exchanged, but knowledge woven into the life of every community. Markets were also stages of spectacle. Dancers performed to attract customers, masks painted with jaguar spots or skeletal grins. Musicians played flutes, drums, and rattles, their rhythms echoing through plazas. Scribes and artists displayed works on bark paper books or pottery, selling both decoration and history. The market was not just survival but celebration, a festival repeated week after week, sustaining the economy and the spirit. The great cities relied on these exchanges. Tikal needed goods from Calakmul, Copan needed obsidian from the highlands, Palenque needed salt from the coast. Rivalries sometimes erupted into war, but trade never truly stopped. Even enemies recognized the necessity of exchange. Where politics divided, commerce united. A city without trade would wither, its rulers powerless, its people hungry. Rituals often surrounded the act of trade. Merchants prayed before journeys, offering incense for safe passage. At markets, buyers might leave gifts for ancestors, asking for fairness in exchange. Cacao beans were counted with care, each transaction watched by both parties, sealed with trust and belief that the gods witnessed every bargain. To cheat in trade was not just a crime against people, it was a crime against the cosmic order. For families, trade shaped daily life. A farmer could exchange maize for cloth, a hunter could bring home salt, a craftsman could acquire tools. Women played an active role, selling food, textiles, and pottery. Children learned by watching, carrying baskets, counting beans, or helping arrange goods. In markets, families saw their labor turned into livelihood, their work transformed into survival. At festivals, markets swelled even larger. Visitors from distant towns arrived, bringing exotic goods, rare animals, or fine crafts. Plazas overflowed, music thundered, and the smell of food was overwhelming. These moments were as much ritual as they were economic, celebrating abundance, linking humans to gods through the act of sharing and exchange. Trade routes extended beyond the Maya world. To the north lay the lands of central Mexico, where obsidian, turquoise, and other goods were exchanged. To the south, routes stretched into Central America, bringing new foods, metals, and ideas. The Maya were never isolated. Their goods and stories traveled, their influence reaching far beyond their own forests and rivers. Through trade and markets, the Maya world bound itself together. Villages, towns, and cities were not isolated stars but constellations, linked by paths of human endurance and shared need. Each cacao bean, each jade bead, each feather carried not only value but connection. Civilization was built not only on pyramids and kings, but on the constant flow of goods, voices, and hands reaching across distance. And so, in plazas filled with sound and color, and on forest trails lined with sweat and footsteps, the Maya kept their world alive. Markets sustained the household, trade sustained the kingdom. Together, they created a civilization not of isolated villages but of a vast and interconnected whole, bound by maize and salt, by jade and cacao, by the endless motion of exchange, rituals of time. For the Maya, time was not a line stretching endlessly forward. It was a living cycle, spiraling like a serpent, each turn carrying echoes of what had come before. To rise with the sun, to plant maize, to light a hearth, all these acts were done not in ordinary time but in sacred rhythm. Every day carried meaning, every number a spirit, every season a reminder that life was woven into the fabric of the cosmos. Two great calendars guided existence. The first was the 260-day ritual calendar, the Tzolkin. It combined 20 named days with 13 sacred numbers, creating a cycle where no 2 days were the same for almost 9 months. Each day carried personality and fate. A child born on 8 Ajor was believed destined for leadership, while one born on 3 Ix might be tied to jaguars and sorcery. Farmers consulted the calendar before planting, priests before rituals, families before marriages. To ignore it was to risk stepping out of harmony with the universe. The second was the solar calendar, the Harb, with 365 days divided into 18 months of 20 days each, plus 5 nameless days of ill omen. These 5 were days of caution, when people avoided travel or work, fearing danger from unseen forces. Together, the Tzolk'in and Harb meshed like gears to form the calendar round, repeating every 52 years. A generation could pass before the same combination returned. This made time tangible. You lived within cycles larger than yourself, yet intimately tied to your own fate. For rulers and priests, the reckoning of time was more than practical. It was divine duty. Astronomers tracked the movements of the sun, moon, and planets with astonishing precision. Venus in particular held deep significance. Its rising marked times for war, sacrifice, and renewal. Priests watched the horizon carefully, recording appearances in bark paper codices, predicting future cycles with accuracy rivaling modern science. To chart the heavens was to understand the will of the gods, and to act accordingly. Festivals punctuated the year, anchoring communities in ritual rhythm. The maize cycle was central. At planting, families offered incense and blood to ensure fertile soil. During the growing season, prayers were whispered to Chark, the rain god, so that storms would bless rather than destroy. At harvest, feasts erupted in plazas, maize, tamales, and cacao drinks shared with neighbors and gods alike. Each stage of the plant mirrored human life, sprouting, ripening, dying, and returning again. The gods themselves were bound by time. They demanded nourishment through ritual to keep the cosmic order turning. Bloodletting ceremonies were acts of timekeeping, feeding the gods so that the sun would rise, the rains would fall, and the world would endure. Rulers cut their own flesh, drawing lines of blood onto paper, which was then burned so the smoke could carry sacrifice into the heavens. These acts were not optional, they were duties, woven into the calendar like planting or harvest. Everyday people lived by these rhythms too. A mother might choose a naming day for her child based on the calendar, believing it would shape the child's destiny. Farmers rose and worked by the solar months, but they also feared the unlucky 5 days when work paused. Marriages were scheduled when the combination of days promised fertility and harmony. Time was not abstract, it was lived, breathed, embodied. Architecture reflected these cosmic cycles. Temples and pyramids aligned with solstices and equinoxes. On certain days, sunlight fell directly through windows or along stairways, casting shadows shaped like serpents. At Chichen Itza, during equinox sunsets, the shadow of a serpent appears to slither down the pyramid of Kukulkan. These were not accidents but careful designs, proof that stone itself could mark time. Worshippers gathered, watching as sky and temple merged, feeling themselves inside the pattern of the universe. The long count calendar extended these cycles even further, measuring vast spans of time from a mythical beginning in 3114 BCE. Dates were recorded on steely stone monuments raised in plazas commemorating accessions of kings, victories in war, and great rituals. To inscribe a date was to anchor human action in cosmic eternity. Even today, the Maya long count has captured imaginations, its cycles stretching thousands of years, reminding us of a civilization that thought in spans beyond generations. Daily rituals of time were quiet but constant. Lighting the hearth each morning was an act of renewal. Placing food on altars before meals acknowledged the gods' share. Farmers rose before dawn, listening to birds that signaled the day's tasks. At night, families watched the stars, their patterns guiding planting, travel, and prophecy. Time flowed not only through calendars but through sound, sight, and movement, embedded in daily life. Humor and humanity softened this cosmic seriousness. People joked about unlucky days, teasing one another when chores went badly. Children asked questions about their birthdays, comparing fates with friends. Storytellers wove myths of gods who quarreled, laughed, or stumbled, reminding listeners that even divine beings could be fallible. Time, though sacred, was also familiar, a companion to be respected, feared, and sometimes smiled at. What set the Maya apart was their ability to bind the smallest human act, grinding maize, naming a child, lighting a fire, to the greatest cycles of cosmos. Nothing was outside time, nothing was meaningless. To live Maya life was to live within a pattern vast and eternal, yet close and intimate. The tick of days was not indifferent but alive, carrying meaning, demanding response, and offering order in a world otherwise filled with uncertainty. In the quiet of a Maya village at night, you would hear not only the sounds of frogs and insects, but the silence of calendars ticking unseen, like gears turning in the heavens. Tomorrow would not simply arrive, it would arrive with its own spirit, its own demand, and when the sun rose, the people would rise with it, once more stepping into the eternal dance of time. Festivals of fire and dance. If daily life in the Maya world was steady and rhythmic, then festivals were its surging heartbeat. On those days, ordinary routine gave way to spectacle. Plazas filled, fires blazed, music thundered, and bodies moved in unison, transforming communities into theatres of devotion. These festivals were not diversions but essential acts, moments when humans fed gods, when time turned, when the cosmic order was renewed. Without them, life itself risked unraveling. Preparations began days in advance. Families set aside food, grinding maize in greater quantities, steaming tamales by the hundreds. Women embroidered clothing with bright patterns, men carved masks from wood, and children gathered flowers, feathers, or resin for incense. Musicians tuned drums and flutes, painters decorated bodies with pigments of red, black, and blue. Entire households buzzed with activity. each person carrying a role in the performance of belief. When the day arrived, crowds streamed toward plazas and temple steps. The smell of copal incense filled the air, sweet, sharp, resinous, its smoke curling like white serpents into the sky. Fires blazed in braziers, crackling as priests sprinkled offerings into flames. Conch shells blared, their hollow cries echoing against stone walls. Drums pounded steadily, heartbeat rhythms rolling through the crowd, rattles shaking in counterbeat, flutes rising above like birdsong. The festival had begun. Dance was at the center. Men and women stepped in patterns taught across generations, their feet striking stone plazas in sync with the drums. Masks transformed them into gods, animals, or ancestors. A dancer in jaguar skin leapt and growled, embodying strength and ferocity. Others wore long-beaked masks, bending and calling like birds. Some dressed as skeletons, rattling bones to remind the living of death's nearness. Through dance, the human body became vessel, temporarily inhabited by powers greater than itself. Fire was constant. Torches ringed the plaza, sparks rising with every gust of wind. Flames illuminated dancers, glinting on jade necklaces and polished obsidian blades. Fire represented renewal, the sun's eternal journey, the heart of the cosmos. Priests fed flames with offerings of food, feathers, or even their own blood. Paper strips stained red were cast into braziers, where the fire consumed them and carried sacrifice skyward. Music swelled with intensity. Large turtle shells were beaten like drums, their hollow echoes resonating deep in the chest. Clay whistles shrieked, imitating bird calls. Shell trumpets roared, announcing moments of transition. The combination was overwhelming, not meant for casual listening, but for immersion, for dissolving ordinary thought into sacred vibration. Sound shook the crowd into unity, binding thousands into one pulse of devotion. Festivals often honored specific gods. For Chake, the rain deity, dancers carried vessels of water, sprinkling droplets onto stone as prayer for storms. For Kukul Khan, the feathered serpent, feathered costumes shimmered in the torchlight, winding in serpent-like patterns across the plaza. For maize deities, ears of corn were displayed, blessed, and shared among the people. Each festival was specific, yet all carried the same purpose: to renew balance between humans and gods. Food was both offering and celebration. Priests placed bowls of maize, cacao, and fruit on altars, leaving them for spirits. Afterward, feasting began for the living. Tamales stuffed with beans or meat, tortillas hot from comals, cacao drinks frothed with honey, or chili plazas turned into banquets. Eating together reinforced the bond not only with gods but with community. Hunger was banished, at least for a day, replaced by abundance and joy. Some festivals carried solemn weight. Bloodletting ceremonies unfolded before silent crowds, rulers piercing tongues, ears, or limbs with obsidian blades. Their blood dripped onto bark paper, later burned as offering. These acts reminded all that kings and queens were not only rulers but conduits, bridges between humans and gods, paying with their own bodies to ensure the turning of time. To witness such moments was to feel awe, fear, and reassurance all at once. Others were joyous, almost theatrical. Performers acted out myths, retelling stories of gods who created, fought, and loved. Comic characters exaggerated movements, drawing laughter even as lessons were taught. Children were delighted, elders smiled knowingly, and everyone felt drawn into the mythic narrative that explained their place in the cosmos. Entertainment and ritual blended seamlessly, one could not exist without the other. The calendar dictated which festivals came when. Planting, harvest, equinoxes, solstices, each demanded ceremonies. Every 52 years, when the calendar round reset, the greatest festival of all occurred, the renewal of time itself. Fires across the land were extinguished, plunging communities into darkness and silence. Then, at dawn, A new fire was kindled in the heart of the city, flames spreading outward until every household hearth was reignited. It was a reminder that time was fragile, dependent on ritual, and that without devotion, the cosmos might falter. Children grew up within this rhythm. They watched parents dance, listened to chants, tasted ritual foods, and carried memories of light and sound into adulthood. Festivals were not simply events but teachers, embedding values, myths, and identity. To participate was to belong to family, to city, to gods. At the end of a festival, plazas echoed with exhaustion and satisfaction. Fires smouldered, drums slowed, dancers collapsed in sweat, and families carried children home asleep on their shoulders. Ashes lay where incense had burned, feathers drifted on the ground, and the scent of copal lingered in the night air. Life would return to routine the next day, fields to tend, maize to grind, but the memory of fire and dance lingered, reminding all that they lived within a cosmic drama larger than themselves. Festivals of fire and dance were not diversions. They were the very acts that sustained the Maya world. Without them, crops might fail, rain might withhold, sun might falter. With them, order returned, hearts were lifted, and the eternal cycle continued. They were the pulse of a people, the visible proof that humanity and divinity were forever entwined. Blood and sacrifice. Among all the rituals of Maya life, none carried greater weight or greater unease than sacrifice. To the Maya, the cosmos was not self-sustaining. It required nourishment. The gods had given humanity maize, rain, sun, and life itself. And in return, the gods demanded something back. That something was blood. It was the sacred fuel, the essence of vitality, the link between humans and the divine. Without it, the universe could falter, and time itself might stop. Bloodletting was the most common form, practiced by rulers, nobles, and even commoners at times of need. It was not done casually but with solemnity. A king or queen might kneel before a crowd, torchlight flickering on jade ornaments, while attendants handed them obsidian blades or stingray spines. With steady breath, they pierced tongues, ears, or limbs, letting blood flow onto strips of bark paper. The paper was then burned, its smoke rising in curling plumes to the heavens. This was communication words written not in ink but in blood, lifted into the sky as offering. The pain was part of the purpose. To shed one's own blood was to prove devotion, to demonstrate that rulers were not distant figures of luxury but living bridges to the gods. Every drop was both personal sacrifice and public reassurance. The king bleeds so the crops will grow, the queen suffers so the rains will come, the royal family offers themselves so that the sun will rise again. In more solemn rituals, human sacrifice was performed. Captives taken in war were the most common victims, their lives offered as repayment for victory and as nourishment for gods of war and time. On temple platforms, priests guided captives through final rites. Hearts were cut from chests with obsidian blades, still beating as they were lifted toward the sky. Bodies were rolled down temple steps, absorbed by the earth that would one day feed new maize. To modern eyes, these acts seem brutal, but within the Maya worldview they were necessary exchanges. The gods had sacrificed themselves to create the world bleeding, dying, and resurrecting, so that humans could live. For humans to return blood was to complete the cycle, to honor the cosmic debt. It was reciprocity on the grandest scale, the binding of human life to divine life. Ordinary people watched these ceremonies with mixed feelings. Awe, fear, reverence, each heart felt a different weight. For some, witnessing sacrifice was reassurance. The gods were fed, balance restored, crops secured. For others, it stirred unease, a reminder of mortality, of the thin line between life and death. Children watched wide-eyed, carrying the memory into adulthood. where they too might one day shed blood in ritual. Not all sacrifices were human. Animals, deer, birds, dogs, or even jaguars were offered. Food was sacrificed too. Bowls of maize, cacao, and honey poured into fire or left on altars. These offerings softened the harshness, reminding people that sacrifice took many forms, from daily gifts of incense to the rare and solemn gift of human life. What mattered was not the scale but the sincerity, the act of giving back what had been given. Sacrifice was often tied to astronomical events, the rising of Venus, solar eclipses, or the completion of calendar cycles demanded offerings. Priests interpreted the heavens, declaring when gods hungered most. On such days, entire cities gathered, filling plazas as rituals unfolded. The sense of cosmic drama was overwhelming. To stand in those crowds was to feel the universe itself balancing on the edge of ritual, sustained only by human devotion. The symbolism of blood ran deep. It was life itself, flowing from the heart, carrying breath and spirit. To spill blood was to release essence, to send it upward as nourishment. For rulers, it also linked them to ancestors and gods, proving their legitimacy. A king who failed to sacrifice risked not only cosmic disaster, but political ruin. Blood was both theology and politics, belief and power intertwined. Even within homes, small sacrifices occurred. Families cut their ears or tongues, dripping blood onto household altars during festivals. Hunters smeared blood on weapons before hunts. Farmers offered drops to fields before planting. These private acts mirrored the grand spectacles of temples, ensuring that every layer of society participated in sustaining the cosmos. Archaeology has revealed traces of these practices. Vessels stained with cinnabar, altars bearing scorch marks from blood-soaked paper, bones buried in ritual pits all testify to the seriousness of sacrifice. Yet alongside these remains are signs of care, offerings of food, music, flowers, and incense, reminding us that sacrifice was not only violence but devotion. It was fearsome and sacred, dreadful and necessary. At night, after such ceremonies, silence hung heavy. Families returned home, hearts still pounding, the scent of copal clinging to their clothes. Fires burned low, and sleep came slowly, disturbed by memories of drums, cries, and flames. Yet by morning, life resumed. Fields awaited, maize needed grinding, children needed feeding. The sacrifice had been made, the gods appeased, the cycle secured. To live as Maya was to live within this cycle of giving and receiving, of blood and maize, of death and renewal. The people understood that the universe was fragile, always at risk of imbalance. Sacrifice, however fearsome, was the anchor holding it steady. Through pain and offering, they sustained not only their gods, but themselves, kings, and divine rule. In the Maya world, kingship was never simply a matter of politics. To rule was to embody the divine, to serve as the living axis between the people and the cosmos. The title of king, Kuhul Arjor, meant Holy Lord, and it carried expectations that no mere human could meet on his own. A king had to bleed, suffer, and shine with the brilliance of gods, holding the fragile balance of the universe in his own body. Queens, too, carried sacred power, sharing in ritual responsibilities, sometimes ruling outright. To speak of Maya kingship is to speak of religion, politics, art, war, and myth, braided into one. Palaces revealed this role in stone. Built around open courtyards, lined with colonnades and chambers, they were centers of administration and ritual. Walls were painted with murals showing feasts, battles, and processions. Throne rooms displayed carved lintels and stucco reliefs, each image reinforcing the ruler's authority. The palace was not only residence but stage. Here rulers received tribute, consulted with nobles, and displayed themselves as earthly embodiments of gods. When a king appeared in public, His presence transformed the city. He wore headdresses heavy with jade, quetzal feathers trailing down his back like living emerald rivers. His face was painted in red, symbolizing life and power, while black paint around his eyes evoked night and mystery. He carried scepters shaped like serpents, masks of gods, or staffs topped with jade. Every gesture was choreographed to show divinity. The people gathered in plazas did not see an ordinary man. They saw Maze incarnate, the sun walking among them, the storm embodied in human form. Rulers anchored their legitimacy in ancestry. They traced lines back not just to human founders but to gods and mythic heroes. Stelae tall stone monuments were erected in plazas, inscribed with glyphs detailing genealogy, conquests, and ceremonies. To walk past these stelae was to walk through a forest of memory, each stone proclaiming, "This king is eternal, this dynasty is blessed, this city is chosen." Queens also stood in these genealogies. Through their marriages, alliances were sealed, and through their rituals, legitimacy deepened. Lady Shook of Yaxchilan, for instance, is remembered not only as consort but as priestess, her bloodletting vision carved in stone as proof of her divine communion. The role of kings extended beyond ritual into the grinding realities of politics. City-states competed constantly, Tikal against Calakmul, Copan against Quirigua, each seeking dominance through warfare and alliances. Kings led armies, directed strategies, and celebrated victories with ceremonies that framed triumph as divine will. Captives from these wars were paraded in plazas, sometimes sacrificed in public rituals, their blood reinforcing the king's role as nourisher of gods. To fail in war was catastrophic. Defeat meant loss of tribute, loss of honor, and sometimes loss of life itself. A captured king could be sacrificed by rivals, his sacred status stripped away, his body consumed by the very rituals he once commanded. Royal courts were centers of culture as well as power. Scribes worked tirelessly, painting codices with histories, astronomical tables, and myths. Artists crafted elaborate pottery, decorated with scenes of courtly life banquets where nobles sat drinking cacao. Musicians played flutes, dancers performed in elaborate costumes, nobles debated policy, priests calculated calendars, and emissaries from distant cities negotiated marriages or alliances. The court was a hive of activity, buzzing with human ambition, sustained by the belief that all of it mirrored and maintained the cosmic order. Ceremonial duties were constant. On days marked by the sacred calendar, rulers climbed temple stairs, thousands watching below. There, in front of the people, they performed bloodletting. A king might draw a thorn-studded rope through his tongue, offering pain as prayer. The blood soaked into paper, later burned so that smoke would rise like a message into the heavens. These ceremonies were not optional. They were the very foundation of kingship. Without them, the ruler risked cosmic disorder, drought, famine, and rebellion. To bleed was to rule. Queens bore these responsibilities too. Lady Sak Kuk of Palenque ruled during a time of crisis, guiding her son Pakal to the throne and ensuring the continuity of dynastic power. Lady Six Sky of Naranjo revitalized her city through military campaigns and rituals recorded in stelae that still stand today. Queens presided over ceremonies, patronized artists, and sometimes commanded armies. Their blood was as sacred as that of kings, their visions as binding. The wealth of the kingdom flowed through rulers. Tribute from vassal towns filled storehouses with maize, cacao, salt, cloth, feathers, and jade. This wealth supported artisans, scribes, warriors, and priests, creating the brilliance of Maya civilization. The ruler's palace became the distribution point of abundance, his rituals the justification for it. People accepted labor and tribute not simply as taxation but as part of the sacred cycle. They gave, and in return the king sustained both cosmos and community. Royal tombs revealed the depth of kingship. Beneath temples, rulers were buried with offerings of jade masks, shell ornaments, carved bone, and painted vessels. Pakal, the Great of Palenque, lay in a sarcophagus carved with the image of the world tree, linking his death to cosmic rebirth. Death did not end a ruler's role, it transformed him into ancestor, continuing to guide his descendants. Successors invoked the dead in rituals, ensuring that the lineage stretched unbroken from gods to ancestors to present rulers. For ordinary Maya, the king's presence was distant but essential. Farmers grinding maize, women weaving cloth, children learning the names of days all believed their survival depended on the king's devotion. They might see him only on festivals, when he appeared high atop temple stairs, blood running down his arms, smoke rising around him. Yet even unseen, his role shaped their lives. If rains fell, if maize sprouted, if wars brought victory, it was because the ruler had done his duty. Kingship was fragile despite its grandeur. Dynasties rose and fell with wars, droughts, or political intrigue. Yet the institution endured for centuries because it bound human life to cosmic necessity. A Maya ruler was not simply one man. He was symbol, ritual, ancestor, and God made visible. His rule was theatre and theology, politics and prayer. Without him, the universe itself might falter. Walking through the ruins today, plazas filled with weathered stelae, palaces with collapsed walls, temples rising like mountains, you feel echoes of that kingship. Every stone carved with glyphs, every mural painted with scenes of sacrifice, every tomb filled with jade speaks of rulers who believed their blood kept the cosmos alive. To understand the Maya is to understand this union of king and god, human and divine. The Maya vision of rule reminds us that leadership was never only about laws or armies. It was about weaving humanity into the very structure of time and cosmos, about bleeding for the sun, feasting for the gods, and carrying the unbearable weight of eternity in a mortal body. Kings and queens did not rule alone, they ruled as vessels, through whom the gods themselves continued creation. Ball game of fate. In plazas of stone cities, tucked between towering temples and royal palaces, lay spaces unlike any other. The ball courts. Long alleys lined with sloping stone walls, ringed with carvings of serpents and skulls. These courts were places of sweat, sound, and destiny. To the Maya, the ball game was not a pastime. It was ritual, performance, and cosmic drama. Each strike of the ball echoed creation itself. Each match carried meaning that could decide the fate of men and kingdoms alike. The game's origins stretched into myth. In the Popol Vuh, the sacred book of the Quiche Maya, two brothers played ball in the world above, their thumping footsteps disturbing the lords of the underworld. Called to Xibalba, the underworld court, they faced trials and death, only for their descendants, the hero twins, to return, outwit the gods of death, and triumph through ball play. The story revealed the game's essence. It was a bridge between worlds, a contest between life and death, between light and shadow. When players entered the court, they stepped into that myth. The court itself was monumental. Some stretched over 100 meters long, framed by vertical or sloping walls. At Chichen Itza, stone rings were set high on walls, each carved with serpents, through which the ball had to pass. Carvings of skulls and warriors decorated the sides, reminding all who entered that this was no child's diversion. Courts were aligned with cosmic directions, their layout symbolizing the universe. The ball moving like the sun, bouncing between heavens and underworld, kept in motion by human will. The ball was heavy, made of solid rubber, weighing up to 9 pounds. To strike, it was no small feat. Players used hips, thighs, elbows, and shoulders, never hands or feet. They wore protective gear, padded belts, armbands, and sometimes wooden helmets. Even so, the impact bruised and battered. A game was as much endurance as skill, demanding strength, agility, and precision. The sound of rubber thudding against stone walls echoed through plazas, drawing crowds to cheer, gasp, and pray. For ordinary spectators, the ball game was thrilling. Children clambered onto ledges for better views. Elders leaned on canes. Families filled the edges of the court. They watched as teams collided, bodies twisting to keep the ball in play. The pace relentless under the blazing Sunday cheers erupted when a player struck the ball cleanly, groans when it veered out of bounds. Yet, beneath the excitement lingered gravity. This was not only sport. Outcomes carried sacred and sometimes deadly consequences. The game was often tied to ritual and politics. Victories could symbolize divine favor. Defeats could shame rulers. In some ceremonies, captives were forced to play, their loss sealing their fate as sacrificial victims. Carvings at Chichen Itza show scenes of decapitation tied to the game, whether symbolic or real. They reinforce the connection between play, sacrifice, and cosmic renewal. To lose in certain matches was to give one's life. To win, in some interpretations, was to earn the honor of sacrifice, joining the gods through blood. Kings used the game as theatre. Rulers sometimes participated themselves, demonstrating divine strength and skill. More often, they presided over matches, seated on platforms, their presence blessing the contest. Victories were proclaimed as evidence of a ruler's cosmic alignment, defeats as warnings of imbalance. Matches could seal alliances, resolve disputes, or commemorate calendar events. To play ball was to enter politics, to place body and fate at the crossroads of power. The ball game carried layers of meaning for the community. It was a lesson in endurance, teaching that life itself required constant effort to keep moving. It was a reminder of myth, echoing the hero twins who overcame death. It was a form of divination, outcomes interpreted as signs of divine will. And it was entertainment, binding communities together in collective excitement, joy, and fear. Music and ceremony surrounded the games. Drums and conch shells marked beginnings. Incense smoke drifted across courts, and priests chanted invocations. Before matches, offerings were made. Maize, cacao, or blood, given to ensure the gods' presence. Afterward, feasts might follow, victories celebrated with food and drink, sacrifices sealing the ritual meaning. For players, the match was grueling. For spectators, it was awe-inspiring. For rulers, it was political theatre. For gods, it was nourishment. The physical danger was real. The heavy rubber ball struck with force that could break bones or cause internal injuries. Players trained from youth, honing bodies into instruments of agility. Success brought fame, honor, and sometimes wealth. To be a skilled ball player was to earn status in a society where most labored in fields. Players could rise above their stations, gaining prestige in courts and plazas. Yet every match carried risk, not only of injury but of ritual death. To step onto the court was to step into uncertainty. Despite its dangers, the game endured for centuries, woven into every Maya city. Courts were built at the center of settlements near temples and plazas, proof of its sacred place in society. Archaeologists have uncovered over 1,000 ball courts across Mesoamerica, each testimony to the game's power. The game connected distant cities, unified cultures, and kept myth alive. At night, after a match, courts stood silent under the stars. The dust settled, torches burned low, and the echoes of rubber and cheers faded. Yet the stone walls remained, carved with serpents and skulls, reminders that the game was eternal, waiting for the next sunrise, the next festival, the next reenactment of creation's struggle. For the Maya, to play ball was to engage in fate. The thud of rubber on stone was the heartbeat of the cosmos, the movement of sun and stars, the contest between life and death. Every match, whether ending in feasts or in sacrifice, was a reminder. Life is a game played between forces beyond human control, and to keep the ball moving is to keep the world alive. Art, glyphs, and story. If stone cities were the bones of the Maya world, then art and writing were its voice. Across temples, palaces, pottery, and books, the Maya poured imagination and meaning into images and words that carried memory across centuries. Their art was not decoration, and their glyphs were not merely records. Together, they were sacred storytelling, a way to make visible the myths, histories, and identities that bound their civilization together. The Maya developed one of the most sophisticated writing systems in the ancient world. Glyphs were intricate, combining pictorial images with phonetic sounds. Each symbol might represent a whole word, a syllable, or a concept, woven into sentences that spiraled with complexity. To read them was to enter a world of poetry and precision, where kings proclaimed victories, priests charted the heavens, and scribes recorded the unfolding of time itself. Bark paper codices, folded like screens, held tables of astronomy, rituals, and prophecies. Painted in vivid colors, they guided priests in ceremonies and rulers in decisions. Carved stone steely-lined plazas, tall and narrow monuments, inscribed with glyphs and images of kings. These were public proclamations, visible to all who walked the city. They told of births and accessions, wars and alliances, rituals and sacrifices. A single monument could carry the weight of generations, tying a current ruler to ancestors and gods. To approach a stela was to stand in the presence of history carved in stone. Murals added color to walls. In Bonampak, paintings show scenes of ritual, battle, and celebration. Nobles adorned in feathers, musicians playing drums, captives awaiting sacrifice. The details are vivid faces grimacing in pain, garments swirling in dance, hands raised in prayer. These murals were not static images. They were living theatre, capturing the pulse of ceremonies for those who stood within palace chambers. Pottery extended storytelling into daily life. Painted vessels depicted gods, myths, and courtly scenes. A cup might show the maize god emerging from the underworld, or a ball game played in mythic realms, or nobles feasting with cacao drinks. To drink from such a vessel was to hold myth in your hands, to be reminded that even the most ordinary act, lifting a cup, was connected to divine stories. Sculpture brought gods and rulers into 3 dimensions. Stucco masks adorned temple facades, their faces fierce with open mouths and wide eyes. Altars bore carvings of serpents, jaguars, or ancestors, reminding worshippers of the powers invoked there. Jade figurines, polished until they glowed, served as offerings, embodying life and eternity. Each form of art was layered with symbolism: a jaguar for power, a serpent for renewal, maize for sustenance, skulls for death and rebirth. Stories flowed through every medium. The Popol Vuh told of the hero twins, their trials in the underworld, their victory through the ball game, and the birth of the sun and moon. These myths were not distant fables. They were living truths, performed in dance, painted on walls, carved in stone. When children heard them at night by the hearth, they learned who they were and how the world had come to be. When rulers reenacted them in ritual, they proved their role as continuers of creation. Writing and art were tools of power. Rulers commissioned monuments to proclaim divine descent, victories in war, and rituals that secured the cosmos. By recording events in glyphs, they tied themselves to time eternal, ensuring their names would endure even when cities fell silent. Literacy was not for all. It was concentrated among scribes, nobles, and priests who guarded the secrets of glyphs. To read was to hold authority, to shape how history itself would be remembered. Yet art was not confined to elites. Common households crafted clay figurines of gods or ancestors, simple yet powerful. Women wove patterns into textiles, each design carrying symbolic meaning: diamonds for stars, zigzags for rivers, crosses for the four directions. Farmers carved images into tools, embedding faith into daily labor. Children molded animals from clay, imitating the sacred world in play. Creativity pulsed at every level, reminding us that beauty and belief were not luxuries but necessities of life. Glyphs also tracked the skies. Astronomers recorded eclipses, Venus cycles, and lunar phases with astonishing precision. These records appeared in codices and on temple walls, guiding ceremonies tied to celestial events. To inscribe such knowledge was to claim control over time itself, to demonstrate that the ruler and his priests understood the heartbeat of the cosmos. When a solar eclipse darkened the sky, people did not panic. They looked to priests, who pointed to glyphs and declared the meaning. The art of the Maya revealed their philosophy. The universe was alive, and every action, whether planting maize, fighting a battle, or drinking cacao, echoed cosmic patterns. Murals, pottery, stelae, and books made those patterns visible, weaving daily life into divine story. Nothing was trivial, nothing without meaning. Even in decline, the art and glyphs endured. When cities were abandoned, stelae remained, glyphs still legible centuries later. Murals faded but did not vanish. Pottery survived in fragments, codices in rare, fragile pages. What endures tells us that the Maya sought permanence, a voice that could outlast empires. And indeed, their voice remains, speaking across time in stone and colour. To walk among these works today is to hear whispers. Glyphs carved deep into stone call out names of kings long dead. Murals still glow faintly with colour, their scenes frozen mid-dance. Pottery shards hold fragments of myth, broken but not silenced. The Maya filled their world with art and story because they knew life itself was fragile. But memory could endure if given form. Through glyphs and images, they reached for eternity. Builders of stone, the Maya world was a civilization of stone, shaped not only by vision but by the relentless labor of countless hands. Every city, every pyramid, every plaza that still stands today rose out of sweat and faith, carried upward block by block, in the belief that stone itself could hold eternity. To look at those structures now is to see permanence, but to live in the time of their making was to witness an unending effort, one generation after another committing itself to the work of shaping mountains from the ground. Limestone was the foundation of their craft, abundant in the lowlands and perfectly suited to their needs. Freshly quarried, it was soft enough to cut with stone tools. Left to harden in the air, it became durable and strong. Workers cracked it from the earth, using wooden wedges and hammers of harder stone. Sometimes they lit fires against the rock and then doused it with water, the sudden change breaking stone along natural seams. Blocks were pried loose, shaped with patience, and then hauled on human shoulders. Without wheels, without beasts of burden, every stone had to be lifted, dragged, and carried along causeways that linked quarries to cities. Imagine the rhythm of thousands of feet pressing into the dust, tumplines cutting into foreheads, backs bent under the weight of limestone, sweat soaking through cloth as the sun hammered down. It was not the labor of slaves chained to tasks, but the duty of communities. Farmers whose fields had been planted joined in construction during the seasons when crops needed little attention. Tribute was not only maize or cacao, it was muscle and time. The act of building was never only practical, it was infused with ritual from the very beginning. Priests blessed the quarries before the first stone was cut. Incense smoke curled into the sky, prayers murmured for protection, and offerings of food or blood marked the start of construction. To cut stone without ritual was to risk imbalance, for limestone was not inert matter. It was the flesh of the earth itself, and removing it was to wound the world. That wound had to be acknowledged and healed through ceremony. When stone reached construction sites, masons shaped and stacked blocks, binding them with lime plaster made by burning limestone in kilns. Fires roared day and night, smoke rising into the jungle as logs fed the flames. The plaster that resulted shone white in the sun, and when entire temples were covered with it, the cities glittered like visions, dazzling against the deep green of the forest. From a distance, they must have appeared like mountains of light, human-made peaks gleaming as though touched by the gods. Temples and pyramids rarely began as finished giants. They grew in stages, layer upon layer. A modest shrine might first rise above a platform, its steps leading to a small altar. Years later, a successor king enclosed it in new stone, building outward and upward, creating a larger pyramid that surrounded the older one. Each generation added to the work of those before, so that within the heart of great pyramids lie older temples still intact, hidden chambers with murals and offerings preserved for centuries. This layering was not just engineering but philosophy. Just as time cycled and renewed itself, just as maize sprouted, died, and returned, so too did temples embody renewal. Each layer honored ancestors while proclaiming new power. The symbolic design of these buildings was as important as their structure. Pyramids were mountains, sacred spaces that connected the three realms, underworld below, earth in the middle, heavens above. To climb their stairways was to ascend toward gods, to step out of ordinary life into divine presence. Shrines at the summits were small, but within their walls the most vital rituals unfolded. Bloodletting by rulers, offerings to deities, prayers to ancestors. These shrines were seen as doorways, thin places where the human and the divine touched. Cities were mapped like cosmic diagrams. The four sides of pyramids aligned with the cardinal directions. Plazas stretched open as stages where the community gathered, their layout mirroring the ordered universe. Ball courts, narrow and stone-lined, represented the underworld, where contests of life and death were reenacted in ritual play. Causeways stretched like veins, connecting ceremonial centers to one another, paved in white plaster so they gleamed like rays of light. Architecture was never random. Every wall, stairway, and doorway participated in meaning. Scale magnified that meaning. At El Mirador, the La Danta complex rose more than 70 meters high and sprawled across half a square kilometer. Its mass surpassed even the Great Pyramid of Egypt. At Tikal, temples pierced the canopy, their crests visible for miles across the flat horizon. Standing on such summits, a ruler looked out over endless jungle, seeing both the vastness of the world and the proof of human will. These were not practical constructions meant for shelter. They were cosmic statements, declarations that humanity could mimic mountains, carve calendars in stone, and turn myth into architecture. The building of such monuments demanded organization that reached into every corner of society. Food had to be supplied daily to thousands of workers. Women and children carried tortillas, tamales, beans, and cacao drinks to work sites. Hunters brought game, fishermen delivered dried fish, and farmers contributed portions of their harvest. Construction was not separate from community life. It was woven into it. A man who cut stone, a woman who carried food, a child who fetched water, all shared in the making of sacred space. When they looked upon the finished pyramid, they saw not only the ruler's glory but their own labor made permanent. Once stone walls were raised, artisans adorned them with beauty. Stucco masks the size of men depicted gods with wide eyes and gaping mouths, serpents curling around stairways, jaguars crouching above doorways, murals in mineral pigments of red, blue, and yellow-covered walls, showing battles, ceremonies, and myths. Light shimmered on polished plaster, colors glowing against white backgrounds. architecture was never bare. It was alive with images, every surface a canvas for belief. Rituals consecrated each stage of construction. Offerings were buried beneath foundations, jade beads, shells, obsidian blades, even human sacrifices, ensuring that buildings were infused with sacred power. Fires were lit, chants sung, blood spilled. These ceremonies marked the transformation of stone from material into meaning. When a temple was complete, festivals erupted, music thundered, dancers performed in masks, incense-filled plazas, and rulers proclaimed divine favor. The city celebrated not only the structure itself, but the renewal of cosmic order it represented. For ordinary people, these buildings shaped daily rhythms. Farmers brought tribute to plazas at the feet of pyramids. Merchants traded in markets shadowed by palaces. Families gathered at festivals on temple stairways. Children played in courtyards, their laughter echoing against stone walls decorated with stories of gods and kings. Workers who had lifted stones walked past them for years afterward, reminded daily of their contribution. These structures were not distant monuments. They were lived spaces, centers of community life, binding people into a shared identity. At night, when torches lit plazas, temples glowed in the dark, their white plaster reflecting firelight. Shadows of priests stretched across stairways. Drums echoed against stone, and chants drifted into the sky. Cities became cosmic theaters where gods and humans met. The architecture amplified sound, framed movement, and turned ritual into spectacle. The buildings were not only seen, they were heard, felt, and lived within. Centuries later, when cities were abandoned, the stone remained. Plaster peeled, vines climbed walls, trees split stairways, but the mass endured. To stumble upon such ruins centuries later was to confront the persistence of human vision. Even now, when you walk among them, you feel the echo of the thousands who cut, carried, and placed each block, their devotion still present in every angle of stone. To the Maya, building in stone was an act of resistance against impermanence. Fields fed families for a season. Stories carried memory for a lifetime, but temples endured for millennia. They were not mere shelters or fortresses, but cosmic diagrams, calendars carved in limestone, mountains raised by hands. To build was to participate in creation, to anchor humanity in eternity. The Maya were builders of more than cities, they were builders of meaning, shaping landscapes into sacred texts that still speak today. Jungle neighbors. Life in the Maya world was inseparable from the jungle that surrounded every city. The forest was not a distant wilderness to be ignored, but a living neighbor, full of voices, dangers, and gifts. Each day, people woke to the sounds of birds calling from the canopy, monkeys howling as dawn broke, and insects buzzing in the humid air. The jungle provided food, medicine, materials, and inspiration, yet it also tested endurance. To live as Maya was to live in constant dialogue with the environment, respecting its power while drawing from its abundance. Animals played central roles in both survival and imagination. Deer were among the most important sources of meat. Hunters moved quietly through undergrowth, armed with bows and spears tipped with obsidian. The meat fed families, while skins became clothing or trade goods. Turkeys were domesticated and kept in households, their feathers used for decoration, their bodies reserved for feasts. Dogs, too, were bred for companionship and sacrifice, sometimes also for food. In rivers and lakes, fish and turtles were caught, adding protein to diets already rich with maize and beans. Bees, small and stingless, produced honey treasured both as sweetener and as medicine. Every animal had its place, none taken for granted, but the relationship was never only practical. The jungle was alive with spirits, and its creatures carried meanings that reached into myth. The jaguar, prowling silently through night, was the most revered. To the Maya, the jaguar embodied power, darkness, and the underworld. Kings adorned themselves with jaguar pelts, claiming its strength as their own. Shamans who sought visions sometimes took on jaguar identities, believing the animal could move between worlds unseen. To encounter one in the forest was terrifying, yet also sacred, a brush with forces beyond human control. The serpent was another powerful neighbor. Venomous snakes commanded both fear and reverence. The feathered serpent, Kukulkan, was a god of creation, wind, and renewal, its image carved into temple walls and stairways. Serpents shed their skin, symbolizing rebirth, and their movement across ground and water linked them to fertility and the life-giving rains. In myths, great serpents swallowed or carried the sun, their bodies stretching across heavens and underworld. To see a snake slithering through leaves was to glimpse echoes of creation itself. Birds filled the skies with color and song. The quetzal, with feathers of brilliant green and shimmering blue, became a symbol of wealth and divinity. Its tail feathers adorned the headdresses of rulers, fluttering like living streams of emerald. Hummingbirds, small and quick, were messengers between lovers and spirits, darting like sparks of vitality. Owls carried darker associations, linked to night, death, and omens. Parrots and macaws shrieked through forests, their red and yellow feathers adding brilliance to ritual costumes. Each bird was a reminder that the air itself carried messages from the divine. Monkeys provided both humor and lesson. Their antics in the treetops inspired laughter. But myths also cast them as cautionary figures, once artists who disrespected gods, transformed into animals as punishment. Their presence near villages reminded people of the thin line between human and animal, between creativity and folly. Children grew up hearing stories of how misbehavior could lead to such transformation, laughter tempered with warning. The jungle also offered plants that were as vital as animals. Medicinal herbs treated wounds, eased fevers, and soothed spirits. Shamans knew which leaves could stop bleeding, which roots could calm pain, which flowers carried hallucinogenic power for visions. Sweat baths, heated with stones and infused with herbs, cleansed body and spirit alike. Trees provided wood for houses, boats, and fires. Cotton plants gave fiber for weaving. Cacao trees gave beans for drink and currency. The jungle was a pharmacy, a pantry, and a temple all at once. Yet the environment was not always gentle. The heat was relentless, rains sudden and heavy, floods common, and droughts devastating. Insects spread disease, snakes bit without warning. Jaguars stalked silently. Survival demanded constant respect. Rituals were offered not only to gods in heavens, but to spirits of forest and water, acknowledging that human life depended on the goodwill of natural powers. To cut a tree without prayer, to hunt without offering, was to invite imbalance. Festivals often celebrated this relationship. Masks of jaguars, serpents, and birds were worn in dances, their movements imitating the animals themselves. Dancers crouched and leapt like predators, hissed and coiled like snakes, flapped arms and shrieked like parrots. These performances were not mere entertainments but affirmations of kinship. By embodying animals, humans reminded themselves that they shared the world with other beings, that boundaries between them were porous. Children learned the forest as a second home. They followed parents on hunts, listened for bird calls, learned tracks of deer and tapir, practiced fishing in streams. They were taught which plants to eat, which to avoid, which to gather for medicine. Childhood was apprenticeship in survival, but also initiation into wonder. To hear a jaguar roar in distance, to see a quetzal flash through canopy, to feel a snake slide silently across a path, these were lessons as much spiritual as practical. Myths wove these encounters into cosmic meaning. The hero twins of the Popol Vuh contended with animals in their trials, drawing strength from some, outwitting others. Gods themselves appeared in animal forms, jaguar gods of night, bird gods of sky. serpent gods of rain. To dream of an animal was to receive a message. To wear its skin in ritual was to channel its power. Human and animal worlds were not separate but intertwined in story, ritual, and life. The jungle was also a source of constant sound. At night, howler monkeys roared, their cries echoing like drums through darkness. Insects buzzed in endless chorus. Frogs croaked in rhythm with rainfall. Birds shrieked from hidden branches. These sounds were not background noise but reminders of the living world pressing close. Sleep came under a canopy alive with voices, dreams shaped by the chorus of neighbors unseen. Even in death, animals accompanied humans. Skulls of deer or jaguars were placed in tombs, feathers adorned burial shrouds, shells lined graves. The spirits of animals were believed to guide souls into the underworld, companions on the final journey. In this way, the relationship extended beyond life itself, binding human fate with that of jungle neighbors forever. To the Maya, the jungle was never silent, never empty. It was full of eyes watching, wings beating, paws padding, scales sliding. It offered food, medicine, inspiration, and danger. It shaped imagination, art, and ritual. To live within it was to live within a world of neighbors, each carrying lessons, each demanding respect. Even now, the descendants of the Maya walk the same forests, listen to the same calls, and tell the same stories. The jaguar still prowls, the quetzal still flashes, the serpent still slides. The jungle remains a neighbor, eternal and untamed, carrying the same awe that filled the lives of those who built cities of stone among its trees. Medicine and healing. The Maya world was filled with illness, injury, and uncertainty, yet it was also filled with remedies, healers, and faith in the power of both plants and spirits. To live in this civilization was to know that health was never taken for granted. Fevers came with the rains, wounds followed the hunt or the battlefield, childbirth carried risks, and unseen forces lurked in the air. In response, the Maya developed a tradition of medicine that was practical and spiritual at once, binding herbs, rituals, and prayers into one seamless fabric. Knowledge of healing was carried by specialists known as men or women trained in the arts of medicine and divination. They were not doctors in the modern sense, but healers who moved easily between the physical and the spiritual. To treat the body was also to treat the soul, and to cure illness was to restore balance with gods and ancestors. Their reputation was built on experience, observation, and trust, passed down through generations of apprenticeship and memory. Plants were the heart of their practice. The jungle offered an endless pharmacy, and healers knew which leaves, roots, flowers, and resins carried power. Bark from the copal tree was burned as incense, its smoke soothing spirits as much as bodies. Leaves of the guava tree eased diarrhea, while chili peppers were used to clear sinuses and stimulate circulation. Aloe soothed burns. Cacao mixed with honey restored strength, and crushed herbs stopped bleeding. Some plants carried hallucinogenic qualities, used not to cure but to open visions, helping shamans diagnose causes of illness hidden from ordinary sight. Preparation of remedies was itself ritual. Herbs were ground with stone mortars, mixed with honey or water, boiled into teas or poultices. Words accompanied the work, chants, prayers, invocations calling on gods to empower the medicine. A healer never believed that the plant alone carried the cure. It was the combination of plant and word, substance and spirit that restored balance. Illness was often seen as more than physical misfortune. It could be caused by imbalance in cosmic forces, by angered spirits, or by envy from others. The evil eye, curses, or forgotten offerings might invite sickness. In such cases, healers performed ceremonies, burning incense, offering food, or even drawing small amounts of blood to appease offended powers. Cures involved not only drinking teas or applying salves, but also correcting relationships with gods, ancestors, and community. Sweat baths, or temazcales, were another form of healing. Small stone or clay structures held fires, heating stones, over which water was poured to create steam. Patients entered the hot, enclosed space, sweating out impurities while inhaling herbs placed on the stones. The heat loosened muscles, cleared lungs, and was believed to purge not only illness but spiritual heaviness. Families used sweat baths regularly for cleansing, while healers used them for treating fevers, arthritis, or complications of childbirth. Midwives held sacred roles, guiding mothers through pregnancy and delivery. They used herbs to ease labor pains, massages to position babies, and prayers to call upon Ixchel, the goddess of fertility and childbirth. Birth was not only biological but cosmic, the moment when new maize entered the world. Infants were bathed, blessed, and given offerings, their entry into life surrounded by ceremony. Mothers received care with herbal teas and rest in steam baths. Recovery seen as both physical and spiritual renewal. Surgery was limited but not absent. Healers cleaned wounds with herbs, set broken bones with splints of wood or reeds, and stitched cuts with plant fibers. They drilled teeth to insert decorative jade inlays, proving both medical skill and cultural value placed on beauty. Trepanation, cutting small holes in the skull, was practiced, perhaps to relieve pressure from injury or for ritual purposes. Such practices were dangerous, yet survival in some cases shows that Maya healers understood more about anatomy and resilience than we might expect. Music, dance, and ritual often accompanied healing. A healer might rattle gourds, blow conch shells, or chant in rhythm while applying remedies, driving out sickness with sound as much as with medicine. Families participated, offering prayers and food to strengthen the patient's spirit. Healing was never private. It was communal, a reminder that health was shared and illness rippled across households. The connection between body and cosmos was constant. To fall ill during unlucky calendar days suggested destiny at work, requiring ritual correction. To recover was to realign with favorable days, to return into harmony with time. Healers consulted calendars as carefully as they did herbs, deciding which days were suited for treatment, which were dangerous for intervention. Health, like planting and sacrifice, was guided by the rhythm of sacred time. Death, when it came, was also managed by ritual care. Healers or shamans helped guide souls with prayers, offerings, and symbolic acts. Death was not failure of medicine but part of the cycle, a return to ancestors, a transition into the underworld. To care for the dying was to ensure their passage was smooth, their memory honored, their spirit at peace. Even the ruins of medicine remain today. Archaeologists have uncovered vessels containing traces of herbs, figurines of healers, and murals showing medical rituals. Modern Maya communities still practice many of these remedies: herbal teas for fever, steam baths for cleansing, chants to protect against envy. The tradition endures, a living echo of ancient belief. For the Maya, healing was never separate from daily life. Families grew herbs in gardens. Mothers passed knowledge to daughters. Fathers taught sons how to set bones or apply poultices. Illness was expected, but so too was the possibility of cure, if body, spirit, and cosmos could be brought back into balance. To live in the Maya world was to accept that health was fragile but never hopeless. The jungle was both threat and remedy, full of dangers but also full of cures. Healers stood at the crossroads, guiding families through fear and pain with the tools of plants, chants, and faith. Their medicine was not modern science, yet it was deeply human, rooted in observation, memory, and the conviction that no sickness existed outside the bonds of spirit and community, family and childhood. The Maya world was built not only in temples and plazas, but also in the courtyards of family homes, where daily life unfolded with a rhythm that stretched from birth to death. Families were the foundation of society, the place where children learned skills, values, and beliefs, and where traditions were passed from one generation to the next. To understand the Maya, you must step into these smaller spaces, where lives were shaped long before they reached palaces or fields. Households were often extended, including parents, children, grandparents, and sometimes uncles, aunts, or cousins. Several small houses clustered around a shared yard, forming compounds where multiple generations lived together. These courtyards were filled with sounds: the grinding of maize on stone slabs, the barking of dogs, the clucking of turkeys, the laughter of children. The hearth was the heart of the home, its three stones symbolizing the three hearthstones of creation, and its smoke rising as offering with every meal. Families gathered there not only to eat, but to tell stories, share news, and honor ancestors. Childhood began with ritual. At birth, a midwife guided the mother through delivery, invoking Ixchel, goddess of fertility and weaving. Newborns were bathed, blessed with incense, and given their first tastes of honey or atoll to welcome them into the world. Naming ceremonies followed, often tied to the sacred calendar. The day of a child's birth carried destiny, shaping personality and fate, so families sought guidance from priests to choose auspicious names. Boys and girls were not just welcomed as children, but as beings marked by cosmic patterns, destined to carry certain roles in life. From infancy, children were surrounded by symbolism. Infants were sometimes bound gently to shape their skulls, a practice believed to make them more beautiful or noble, echoing the elongated heads seen in divine images. Some had small jade beads hung from their foreheads to encourage crossed eyes, another trait linked to beauty and divinity. These practices may seem strange now, but for the Maya they were visible signs of connection to gods and ancestors. Childhood was also a time of learning by imitation. Boys followed fathers into fields, carrying small baskets, watching how maize was planted, how weeds were cleared, how tools were used. They learned to fish, to set traps, to carve simple tools from wood. Girls stayed close to mothers and grandmothers, watching how to grind maize, weave cloth, prepare food, and care for younger siblings. Skills were taught not in formal lessons, but through daily repetition, stories, and gentle correction. Play was never far from work. Children made toys from clay, tiny figurines of animals, whistles shaped like birds, spinning tops. They played with small rubber balls, imitating the great ball games of plazas. Games taught coordination, strength, and the joy of competition, preparing them for adult roles. Laughter filled courtyards as children chased one another, climbed trees, or splashed in rivers. Even in a world of labor and ritual, there was room for joy. Adolescence brought new responsibilities. Boys began helping in heavier tasks, cutting wood, carrying water, assisting in construction projects. Girls took on weaving, cooking, and caring for infants. By their teenage years, most children were already functioning as adults within the household. Marriage came early, often arranged by parents to strengthen alliances between families. Rituals marked these transitions with feasts, offerings, and blessings, calling upon gods to guide the new stage of life. Marriage itself was seen as joining not just two individuals, but two families. Priests or matchmakers arranged unions, consulting calendars to ensure compatibility. Ceremonies included the lighting of a new hearth, symbolizing the creation of a new household within the cosmic order. Husbands and wives worked side by side, their labor complementing each other. Men in fields, hunting or construction, women in weaving, cooking, and maintaining the hearth. Both contributed to survival and ritual. Both bound together in cycles of time and duty. Elders held honored roles within families. Grandparents told stories of ancestors, myths of gods, and lessons drawn from long lives. Their wisdom was sought in disputes, their memory preserved in rituals. To grow old was not to fade into irrelevance, but to become a keeper of history and guide for younger generations. Children listened at night to grandparents' voices, learning not only practical lessons but the meaning of existence. Death within families was met with ritual as carefully as birth. Loved ones were buried beneath houses or in nearby cemeteries, accompanied by offerings of food, tools, and ornaments. Families continued to honor them, leaving food or incense on small altars, speaking their names so they remained present. Ancestors were believed to linger close, protecting households and guiding decisions. Family life thus extended beyond the living, binding the dead and the unborn into a continuous lineage. Daily routines tied families together. Mornings began with grinding maize, the rasping of stone on stone echoing across compounds. Breakfasts of tortillas or atole sustained workers heading to fields or workshops. Midday meals brought families back together, eating tamales or beans beneath the shade of trees. Evenings ended with stories told by firelight, the smoke rising to mingle with stars. The rhythm of family life was steady, reliable, comforting, and infused with ritual meaning. Through it all, children absorbed values. Respect for elders, gratitude for maize, devotion to gods, and responsibility to community were instilled through constant example. Every meal, every chore, every story reinforced belonging. The family was the first school, the first temple, the first government. In its embrace, children grew into adults who knew not only how to survive, but how to live within a cosmos ordered by gods and ancestors. Even today, Maya descendants carry echoes of these traditions. Families remain central. Courtyards still fill with grinding, weaving, laughter, and story. Children still learn by watching. Elders still guide, and rituals still mark birth, marriage, and death. The continuity reminds us that for the Maya, family was not a private matter but the core of civilization, the place where the cosmos itself was reflected in daily life. To look at the Great Pyramids is to see the grandeur of kings, but to look into the courtyards of homes is to see the true strength of the Maya. Civilization was sustained not only by rulers and priests, but by mothers teaching daughters, fathers guiding sons, grandparents telling stories, and children learning to weave maize, time, and meaning into life. Families and childhood were the roots, and from them grew the entire world of the Maya. War and rivalry. The Maya world was not a single empire under one crown, but a constellation of city-states, each ruled by its own dynasty, each striving for prestige, wealth, and divine favor. Between these cities, rivalry was constant. Alliances were formed and broken, battles waged, captives taken, and victories celebrated with monuments and rituals. War was never only about land or resources. It was about honor, tribute, and the cosmic balance that rulers claimed to uphold. To live in this world was to live beneath the shadow of conflict, knowing that a quiet season could quickly give way to drums of war echoing across the jungle. The city of Tikal clashed with Calakmul, Copan with Quirigua, Dos Pilas with its neighbors, and dozens of smaller polities fought for dominance in their own regions. Each city sought to expand influence, secure trade routes, and prove its ruler's legitimacy. A king's greatness was measured not only in temples built or rituals performed, but in victories won. Failure in battle could undermine divine authority, while triumph reinforced the claim that the gods favored the dynasty. Warfare was organized with ritual precision. Armies assembled under banners bearing the symbols of dynasties, serpents, jaguars, and gods painted on cloth and skin. Warriors carried spears tipped with obsidian, bows with arrows, and clubs edged with sharp blades of volcanic glass. Armor was minimal, often padded cotton shirts hardened with salt water, light enough for swift movement in the heat of battle. Helmets and shields bore bright feathers, jade inlays, and animal imagery, meant to intimidate as much as to protect. The clash itself was fierce, but battles were often less about slaughter than about capturing high-ranking enemies. Taking a rival noble alive was more valuable than killing him, for captives could be displayed in triumph, sacrificed in rituals, or used to strengthen alliances. Warriors measured glory by the prisoners they delivered, each captive a testament to courage and favor of the gods. Still, violence was real, wounds severe and death frequent. Arrows pierced, clubs shattered bones, obsidian blades cut deep. The forest echoed with cries, drums, and the whistle of arrows. Warriors entered combat not only with weapons but with faith. They painted their faces with black and red, marked with symbols of death and power. They carried charms blessed by priests, feathers from sacred birds or bones of ancestors to protect them. Before leaving, families offered prayers, incense, and blood, asking gods to grant victory and safe return. To march into war was to step into ritual space as much as into danger. When cities triumphed, victory was proclaimed with festivals. Captives were paraded through plazas, heads bowed, bodies bound, their fate already sealed. Rulers appeared in full regalia, demonstrating divine favor. Sacrifices followed, blood offered to gods as thanks for victory. Stelae were carved to commemorate the event, dates recorded in glyphs so that centuries later, the triumph would still be remembered. Monuments showed kings standing tall over kneeling captives. The message clear: our dynasty is strong, our gods are with us, we are eternal. Defeat, however, carried shame. A captured king might be forced into ritual humiliation, his blood spilled in a rival's city. Entire dynasties could be broken, cities abandoned, vassals seized by stronger powers. Families of the defeated faced exile or enslavement. For common people, defeat meant heavier tribute, harsher demands, and sometimes forced relocation. War rippled through all layers of society, changing lives in ways both immediate and long-lasting. Not all conflict was open battle. Ambushes on trade routes, raids on villages, and sudden attacks during harvest seasons weakened rivals without grand confrontations. Diplomacy played a role too. Marriages between dynasties forged alliances, while gifts of jade, cacao, or feathers maintained fragile peace. Yet even peace was uneasy, always shadowed by the knowledge that allies could become enemies with the turn of a calendar cycle. For commoners, war was both distant and immediate. They were not the ones who inscribed stelae or led armies, but they provided the food, supplies, and labor that sustained campaigns. Farmers grew maize for warriors, craftsmen produced weapons, women wove cloth for tribute. When battles came close, families fled fields, carrying children and food into forests, waiting anxiously to see which banners would return. Victory or defeat determined whose tribute they would pay, which ruler they would serve, which gods demanded their loyalty. Children grew up in the shadow of these rivalries. They heard stories of great battles, victories of ancestors, and heroic captures. Boys practiced with toy spears, imagining themselves as warriors who would one day bring honor to their families. Girls wove banners or prepared food, learning that their labor too was part of war. The cycle of conflict was normalized, woven into the rhythm of life as much as planting and harvest. Even in art and story, war was constant. Murals showed scenes of captives bound and kneeling. Pottery depicted warriors striking enemies. Glyphs recorded dates of victories and the names of captured lords. Myths tied warfare to cosmic struggle, portraying battles as reflections of God's conflicts in the heavens and underworld. To fight was to participate in those eternal contests, to reenact the struggle of creation itself. And yet, there was also weariness. Droughts and famine sometimes coincided with increased warfare, straining communities already struggling. As centuries passed, constant rivalry weakened even the greatest cities. Tikal, Calakmul, Copan, each reached peaks of glory but eventually faced decline, their strength eroded by endless conflict. War brought prestige but also instability. and in time, it helped unravel the very civilization that had thrived for so many centuries. Still, in its height, war was as essential to Maya identity as maize or ritual. It defined rulers, tested warriors, bound families to gods, and shaped history carved in stone. To live in that world was to live under banners that shifted with fortune, to hear drums that might summon to festival or to battle, to know that rivalry between cities was as eternal as the jungle itself. Collapse of Maya Empire. For centuries, the Maya world seemed eternal. Stone cities rose above forests. Kings proclaimed their power in glyphs and rituals. Calendars turned in cycles that promised order. But even the most brilliant civilizations carry seeds of change within them. Beginning around the 8th and 9th centuries, the great classic cities of the lowlands Tikal, Calakmul, Copan, Palenque, and many others entered a long decline. It did not come as a single sudden collapse, but as a slow unraveling, felt in households and fields long before temples grew silent. To live through that time was to feel the weight of uncertainty pressing heavier each year until the rhythms that had held society together began to falter. Drought was one of the great forces of change. The Maya had always lived in a land where water was both abundant and precarious. Rains came in torrents, filling rivers, lakes, and reservoirs, but they could also fail. Archaeological evidence shows that extended droughts struck in the centuries leading to collapse, drying reservoirs, reducing harvests, and straining populations. For families, this meant days of hunger, fields of maize shriveled in sun, prayers rising with greater urgency to Kayak, the rain god. Ceremonies grew more frequent, sacrifices more desperate. But when clouds refused to gather, fear spread. Without rain, crops withered, and without crops, no city could endure. At the same time, warfare intensified. Rivalries between city-states grew harsher as resources dwindled. Armies clashed more often, battles left fields abandoned, and captives flowed into rival cities. Stelae from this period show kings still proclaiming victories, but beneath the triumphs lay exhaustion. Endless conflict drained populations, weakened alliances, and undermined faith in rulers who claimed divine favor. When defeat came too often, when kings bled without restoring order, people began to doubt. The burden of supporting cities grew heavier. Tribute demanded by rulers maize, cacao, cloth, labor-strained households already struggling with poor harvests. Farmers who once fed both families and markets now struggled to feed even their children. Laborers called to build temples felt resentment when hunger gnawed at their stomachs. Markets once filled with goods grew thinner, trade routes disrupted by conflict and instability. The sense of abundance that had defined great cities began to fade. For ordinary people, the decline was felt most directly in daily routines. Families left homes near cities to seek survival in smaller villages or more fertile regions. Children grew up in communities that no longer looked to great temples for guidance. Rituals continued, but on a smaller scale, within households and villages rather than on massive plazas. The grandeur of stone monuments no longer seemed eternal but became reminders of a past that felt increasingly distant. Disease may also have played a role. Populations living in dense cities, combined with weakened bodies from malnutrition, would have been vulnerable to epidemics. While direct evidence is difficult to trace, oral traditions and archaeological hints suggest that illness spread in certain regions. To a family, disease would have felt like yet another blow from gods already withholding rain. Healers worked with herbs and rituals, but when fevers swept through households, despair deepened. Environmental pressure compounded the crisis. Forests had been cleared for fields, lime kilns, and construction. Soil erosion reduced fertility, and without careful management, fields turned less productive. With drought, war, and overuse combined, once thriving centers found themselves unsustainable. People voted with their feet, leaving temples behind, walking away from plazas that once rang with drums and chants. Abandonment was not dramatic but gradual, one household at a time, until entire neighborhoods stood silent. Even as great cities declined, rituals did not vanish. Families continued to honor ancestors, to light hearths, to offer maize and blood. Local leaders replaced kings, shamans replaced royal priests, and community life recentered around the village instead of the city. The cosmos was still believed to need nourishment, but without massive temples and dynasties, that nourishment took humbler forms. The gods were not abandoned. They were brought closer, honored in courtyards and fields. For those who lived through the transition, the feeling must have been bewildering. Grandparents remembered days of festivals with thousands gathered, when kings stood high on temple stairs, when markets overflowed with goods from distant lands. Children grew up in quieter places, knowing temples only as ruins covered in vines. Stories of kings told like distant legends. The sense of decline was not only material but emotional, the slow recognition that the world had shifted from greatness to survival. And yet, the Maya did not vanish. Cities may have been abandoned, dynasties broken, but people endured. They adapted, moving to new lands, reshaping traditions, carrying language, rituals, and knowledge forward. The post-classic period saw new centers rise, such as Chichen Itza and Mayapan, proof that resilience remained. The classic collapse was not the end of a people, but the end of an era, a turning of one cycle into another. Looking back, the decline of the cities reveals how fragile even the most impressive civilizations can be. Stone can endure, but without water, food, and faith, no monument can hold a people together. For the Maya who lived in those centuries, the decline was not abstract history but the ache of hunger, the fear of war, the decision to leave homes behind, the sadness of watching once great plazas fall silent. Yet in their endurance, they left behind more than ruins. They left memory, tradition, and the living continuity of their descendants. Today, when you walk among abandoned temples overtaken by jungle, you feel both loss and persistence. Vines crack stone, roots twist around stairways, birds nest in empty chambers. Yet glyphs remain legible, murals faint but present, structures still towering above the canopy. The decline did not erase. It transformed. The cities became part of the forest again, neighbors to jaguars, parrots, and serpents, waiting for future generations to uncover them. For the people who walked away, the silence of plazas was not the end but the beginning of new ways of living. Families carried their hearthstones with them, lit fires in new villages, and continued the eternal cycle of maize, time, and faith. The Great Decline was painful, but it was also survival. A reminder that civilizations may rise and fall, but people endure, adapting to whatever the gods and the earth demand. Spanish arrival. By the early 16th century, the great classic cities had already grown quiet. Tikal, Calakmul, Copan, Palenque, once brilliant centers of ritual and rivalry, now stood wrapped in jungle, their plazas echoing only with the cries of parrots and the rustle of leaves. Yet the Maya people had not disappeared. They lived in smaller towns and villages, farming maize fields, trading cacao, weaving cloth, and carrying forward traditions in ways more humble but no less profound. It was into this living world, still vibrant though no longer dominated by towering dynasties, that strangers arrived, men from across the sea, riding on ships with billowing sails, clad in iron and bearing weapons of thunder. The Spanish arrival marked a turning unlike any the Maya had known before, a transformation not only of politics and power, but of spirit, faith, and daily life. The first encounters were confusing mixtures of curiosity, fear, and violence. In 1511, a Spanish shipwreck left survivors on the Yucatan coast. Some were killed, others enslaved, but one Gonzalo Guerrero lived with the Maya, married into their community, and became a respected warrior, teaching new tactics and fighting alongside his adopted people against later invaders. His story foreshadowed the complexity of what was to come, not a simple tale of conquest, but of blending, resistance, survival, and unexpected transformation. Hernán Cortés passed through Maya lands in 1519, marching toward the heart of the Mexica Empire. His presence left ripples, but the full force of conquest came later, when Francisco de Montejo and his family launched campaigns into Yucatan beginning in the 1522. Their efforts stretched across decades. Unlike the swift fall of Tenochtitlan, the Maya resisted fiercely, refusing to yield quickly. City by city, town by town, the Spaniards fought to impose control, and each advance was met with resistance, ambushes, and retreats into forests. The campaigns dragged on for generations. To the Maya, the sight of horses was like seeing gods fused with animals. The thunder of hooves, the gleam of armor, and the roar of cannons shocked the senses. Muskets sent smoke and fire into the air, the smell of sulfur mixing with the cries of the wounded. Steel swords sliced more efficiently than obsidian blades, leaving wounds unfamiliar and terrifying. Yet the Spaniards were not invincible. The jungle slowed them, rains bogged down their supplies, and Maya fighters nimble, skilled in ambush, struck from shadows. For decades, battles tipped back and forth, victories and losses written in both Spanish letters and Maya memory. The deadliest weapon the Spaniards carried was unseen. Disease travelled with them: smallpox, measles, influenza illnesses, against which the Maya had no defences. Entire villages sickened, elders died, children wasted away. Survivors watched helplessly as fevers swept through households, leaving silence where laughter and grinding of maize had once filled the air. Rituals were performed, incense burned, prayers whispered, but no offering could stop the invisible tide. The population dwindled, and with each loss, resistance grew harder to sustain. Spanish conquest was not only military, it was spiritual. Missionaries came with crosses, declaring the gods of maize, rain, and sun to be false. They toppled idols from temples, burned effigies, and razed churches where shrines had once stood. In 1562, Diego de Landa ordered a great burning of Maya books in Yucatan. Codices, folded bark paper filled with painted glyphs recording astronomy, prophecy, and history were thrown into flames. Centuries of knowledge disappeared in a single day. For the Maya, it was like the destruction of memory itself. The voices of ancestors turned to ash. Yet even as idols fell, resilience endured. Many Maya outwardly converted, attending Mass, kneeling before saints, and learning Christian prayers. But beneath this surface, older traditions lived on. Crosses raised in villages often bore meanings that fused with symbols of world trees. Saints were identified with gods of rain, maize, or war. Festivals continued with new names but familiar dances, masks, and offerings. The Spanish sought to replace, but the Maya transformed instead, weaving new layers into their traditions, ensuring that the essence of their worldview remained alive. Daily life changed profoundly. Tribute was now demanded not by kings but by encomenderos. Spanish overlords granted rights over communities. Families paid with maize, honey, cotton cloth, and labor. Villages were reorganized into grid-like towns, each centered on a church rather than a temple. Spanish governors replaced Maya rulers, though local nobles often retained limited power as intermediaries. Markets persisted, but goods flowed increasingly toward colonial authorities. The rhythms of planting and harvest remained, yet the weight of tribute grew heavier, binding families to demands beyond their own survival. Resistance did not vanish. Maya towns rose against Spanish garrisons, ambushed convoys, and sometimes drove invaders out. Entire communities fled into forests, preferring exile to submission. Guerrilla warfare stretched campaigns for decades, frustrating Spanish commanders. The Itzar Maya of Tayasal, deep in the Peten region, resisted longer than any other. Their city on Lake Peten Itzar remained unconquered until 1697, nearly 2 centuries after first contact, when Spanish soldiers finally attacked with ships and cannon. Their endurance was astonishing, a testament to the determination of a people unwilling to yield completely. For ordinary families, the experience of conquest was a cycle of loss and adjustment. They buried relatives lost to disease, carried burdens of tribute, and watched temples crumble. Yet they also continued planting maize, weaving cloth, and raising children with stories of hero twins, jaguars, and serpents. The Spanish presence pressed heavily, but identity did not vanish. Instead, it adapted, surviving beneath the surface of imposed authority. Imagine a family in a small village in the late 16th century. At dawn, the mother grinds maize on a stone slab, her daughter watching closely. The father sets out for fields, carrying tools. At midday, they gather, eating tortillas and beans, speaking in Maya tongue. In the evening, they attend Mass at the new church, crossing themselves under the gaze of a priest. But later, in the courtyard, incense burns quietly, and food is set out for ancestors, just as it always had been. Conquest may have reshaped structures, but it could not sever the bond between people, land, and gods. Stories carried resilience as much as rituals. The hero twins' triumph over the Lords of Death took on new resonance, symbolizing survival even in the face of overwhelming forces. Jaguars, serpents, and maize gods remained present in art and speech. Children grew up bilingual in spirit, speaking the language of the conqueror when required, but dreaming in the language of ancestors. Memory adapted, but it did not break. Even today, that endurance is visible. Millions of Maya descendants live across Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador. They carry surnames of Spanish origin, but they also speak Maya languages, plant maize in milpas, and weave textiles with patterns inherited from centuries past. Festivals blend Catholic saints with ancient rituals, crosses stand decorated with flowers and maize, and markets hum with the same energy that filled plazas 1,000 years ago. The Spanish arrival was devastating, but it was not the end. It was the beginning of a new cycle, one of survival, adaptation, and persistence. The Spanish came with steel and fire, with crosses and laws, and they reshaped the political and religious landscapes of the Maya world. They burned books, silenced temples, and demanded tribute. Yet beneath all of it, the people endured. They carried forward the maize that still fed them, the stories that still explained the cosmos, and the memory of ancestors who had built cities of stone. Conquest closed one era, but opened another, proving that while monuments may fall and dynasties crumble, a people's spirit can continue, resilient and unbroken, across centuries. Legacy and memory. Though centuries have passed since the height of their kingdoms, the Maya are not gone. Their legacy is not confined to ruins wrapped in vines, nor to glyphs carved in stone, nor to fragments of codices rescued from fire. It endures in people, in language, in food, in ritual, in story, and in the very landscapes where maize still grows tall beneath the Sunday. To speak of legacy is not to mourn a vanished civilization, but to honor a living one, carried forward through survival, adaptation, and memory. Walk through the highlands of Guatemala, and you will hear Maya languages spoken in markets, each tongue a thread tied to ancestors. Quiche, Ki, Yucatec, and dozens of others remain vibrant, living vessels of thought and identity. Every sentence echoes with centuries of continuity. In weaving, women create cloth patterned with diamonds, zigzags, and crosses, each design carrying meaning, linking present to past. Colors mirror those seen on murals and pottery, now woven into hoopils worn daily. Threads become memory, wrapped around bodies as both clothing and heritage. In kitchens, legacy simmers with every meal. Maize is still ground on stone slabs, still pressed into tortillas, still steamed into tamales. Cacao drinks are prepared with chili and honey, carrying the same bitter richness once reserved for nobility and gods. Beans, squash, peppers, and herbs continue to sustain families. To eat in a Maya home is to taste continuity, stretching back thousands of years. Food is memory, nourishment, and prayer combined. Ritual endures as well. Though transformed, crosses rise in village squares, but they are often decorated with flowers, maize, and pine branches, carrying echoes of world trees and sacred mountains. Festivals honor Catholic saints, yet dances feature jaguars, serpents, and ancestral spirits. Incense still burns, its smoke rising as it did in ancient plazas, carrying prayers to both old gods and adopted saints. The blend is seamless, neither wholly ancient nor wholly colonial, but uniquely Maya, a testament to adaptation that refuses erasure. Stories continue by firelight and in classrooms, in books and on tongues. The hero twins still play their eternal ball game in myth. Jaguars still prowl through dreams. Serpents still coil in heavens and rivers. Children grow up with tales that anchor them in cycles of time, teaching lessons of resilience, humility, and cosmic balance. Myth lives not as relic but as teacher, guiding new generations through challenges that differ in detail but not in essence from those faced by ancestors. The ruins themselves are part of legacy. Tourists walk among temples at Tikal, Palenque, Chichen Itza, and Copan, marveling at scale and beauty. For descendants, these are not ruins but sacred sites, places where ancestors still dwell. Ceremonies are performed at their bases, candles lit, prayers spoken, incense carried upward on ancient stairways. The stones whisper with memory, not silent but alive, their endurance proof that faith carved in limestone resists even centuries of abandonment. Scholars have uncovered only fragments of what was lost. The burning of codices silenced much, yet glyphs on stone remain, slowly deciphered. Each new reading reveals names, dates, and deeds of kings and queens, stories once hidden returning to light. Astronomy tables speak again of Venus cycles, ritual texts of ceremonies, histories of wars and alliances. What was once ash is now memory reborn through patient study, reuniting descendants with voices of ancestors. The Maya legacy also lies in resilience. Conquest, drought, war, and colonization could not erase them. Communities endured, adapted, and survived, often in silence, often beneath oppression, but always carrying identity forward. Today, millions proudly call themselves Maya, living proof that civilizations do not vanish when temples fall. They transform, they bend, but they do not break. Legacy extends beyond their own lands. Maize, once sacred offering, now feeds much of the world. Cacao, once bitter drink of kings, is sweetened into chocolate enjoyed globally. Words like hurricane come from their languages, carried across oceans. Their understanding of astronomy, time, and cycles continues to inspire, reminding us of how deeply ancient people observed the cosmos. Even the 2012 fascination with the Maya calendar, though misunderstood, reflects the enduring power of their vision of time. Above all, the Maya legacy is one of perspective. They saw the universe as alive, every day carrying meaning, every act part of cosmic balance. To grind maize, to plant fields, to raise children, to carve stone, all were sacred. Their vision invites us to remember that life is not divided into ordinary and divine, but woven as one. That lesson survives, whispering still in languages, rituals, and stories. When you look at the stars, you see what they saw. When you hear rain fall, you hear what they prayed for. When you taste maize, you taste what they revered as life itself. Their memory is not distant, it lives wherever people live, with reverence for cycles, for nature, for time, and for story. The Maya are not just a past, they are present and they are future. Their legacy endures not in ruins alone, but in hearts, voices, kitchens, and plazas, in every child learning language, in every elder telling story. It is a legacy of stone and spirit, of endurance and transformation, reminding us that civilizations do not vanish when dynasties fall. They live on in people, resilient, adaptable, eternal as maize itself. The journey has taken you across centuries, through maize fields and stone cities, along jungle paths and into sacred plazas. You have walked with farmers and kings, with healers and warriors, with children learning by firelight and elders whispering stories of the gods. You have heard the laughter of families in courtyards, the pounding of drums in festivals, the hush of priests drawing blood for the cosmos, the echoes of battles in the forest, and the silence that followed the decline of great cities. You have seen the arrival of strangers from across the sea, the burning of books, and the persistence of memory carried in food, cloth, and story. And now you have arrived in the present, where the Maya still endure, still speaking, still weaving, still planting, still remembering. As this long tale comes to rest, let your breathing slow. Imagine the warmth of night air after the rains, carrying the scent of earth and smoke. Hear in the distance the fading hum of insects, the soft rustle of leaves. Picture the glow of a hearth, embers dimming, their light reflected in the quiet eyes of those listening to the end of a story. The world narrows to small, steady sounds, the grinding of maize, the whisper of cloth, the rhythm of heart and breath. What rises from the story is not noise or spectacle, but calm. The cycles of time turn gently. Maize is planted again, families gather again, ancestors are remembered again. Nothing is ever truly lost. Everything returns. And as you drift towards sleep, you too step into that cycle, carried by memory, folded into the rhythm of the eternal.